The Welsh Labour Government in Cardiff fund their voter base, but thanks to the foresight of this Conservative Government, money is now flowing from Whitehall to Wrexham. 13 million Levelling Up Fund, 20 million Towns Fund, 24 million Share Prosperity Fund, and the prospect of 160 million Investment Zone, and we're working on a civil service hub. So will the Minister agree with me, after 20 years of neglect by the Welsh Labour Government, this Conservative Government has firmly put Wrexham on the map?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm absolutely delighted to agree with the Honourable Lady. The UK Government is putting Wrexham on the map. I, of course, was delighted with the £160 million investment zone across Wrexham and Flintshire, which was marked by a visit from the Chancellor to the area, for the £20 million Town Fund for Wrexham, ensuring long-term certainty and investment for the area, and for the growth deal. And I believe that the Freeport in North Wales will also be beneficial to her constituents.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. According to research by the Bevan Foundation, nearly 1 in 4 Welsh children have reported that they've recently been worried about being cold, and around 1 in 8 have worried about being hungry. What's this government going to do about it?
Well, Mr Speaker, the UK Government has spent £96 billion on measures to help the least well-off across the United Kingdom throughout these difficult times that have been brought about as a result of the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine. And, of course, on top of that, at the Altman's statement, we were able to announce a cut in national insurance, which is going to put more money into people's pockets. And I hope he'll be talking to his constituents, who are no doubt being hit by the fact that they are paying the highest taxes in the whole of the United Kingdom as a result of the policies of the Scottish National Party government.
Shadow Minister Jessica Morden.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I join in the tributes to Glenys Kinnock, who was much loved by us all. Earlier this year, the Secretary of State told my honourable friend here that his government would prioritise helping the most vulnerable, yet Welsh households still face the consequences of 13 years of his government's economic failures, with a historically high tax burden and his own constituents paying on average £240 more each month on their mortgages. So can the Secretary of State explain then why his Conservative colleagues in the Senedd are calling for the Welsh Government to withdraw its £40 million mortgage support scheme for those at risk of repossession?
Well, Mr Speaker, the UK Government have already brought forward a mortgage charter to support anyone getting into difficulties. But what I can say to the Honourable Lady is that I hope she will agree that the fact that the Government have delivered on its pledge to halve inflation over the last year means that everyone in Wales is better off. The cut to national insurance is going to mean that everyone in Wales is better off. The increase in the living wage means that all those on low salaries are going to be better off, as will the Government's commitment to ensure that pensions and benefits are rated in line with inflation.
Kevin Foster.
Question number 4, please, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, the UK Government is investing in Wales and in the Welsh tourism industry, which has been evidenced most recently by the decision to allocate £500,000 to the Hay Festival, a project which was, of course, championed by my honourable friend. It is a pity that the Welsh Government are not taking the same view about the importance of the tourism industry and are bringing forward a tax which signals that Wales is closed for business.
Foster.
Well, I thank him for his answer. It's no surprise hitting tourists with a tax is likely to deter them from wanting to visit Wales, despite the natural beauty of places like Snowdonia and the attractions of visiting locations like Anglesey. Alongside highlighting the folly of this move from the Welsh Labour Government, will he also ensure anyone advocating for a tax on tourism for anywhere else in the UK is reminded the negative impact it would have on our tourism sector?
Well, Mr Speaker, I can assure the honourable gentleman that not only will I be reminding the Welsh Labour Government about the importance of supporting the tourism industry and the folly of bringing forward a tax, but my colleagues in the Conservative group in the Senedd will also be making that point, and I hope that the Welsh Labour Government will listen to them and also listen to the Wales Tourism Alliance, which has said that this tax is going to be a tax on jobs and a tax on an industry that employs 1 in 10 people in Wales.
Virginia Crosby.
Question 5, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 5 and 14 together. Madam Deputy Speaker, all of us support speed limits in places where there is a risk to life. I have supported speed limits outside schools or hospitals or other places in my own constituency. But the Welsh Labour Government's policy of bringing in a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit on all 30-mile-an-hour roads, in other words, a blanket speed limit, is damaging for the economy By their own figures, they have suggested that this could create a £4.5 billion hit to the Welsh economy. They need to think again.
Virginia Crosby.
May I thank the Secretary of State for his answer. Over 8,700 on this morning and almost 500,000 across Wales have signed the Senedd petition to rescind and remove the disastrous 20-mile-an-hour law. In fact, more people have signed the petition than voted for Labour in the last Senedd election. Unlike the Welsh Labour government, will the Secretary of State listen to people across Wales and join me in calling for the Welsh Labour government to reverse this new disastrous 20-mile-an-hour law?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, I absolutely do agree with the Honourable Lady, and I do call upon the Welsh Labour government to rescind this policy of a blanket 20-mile-an-hour speed limit across Wales, and at the same time I also call upon them to rescind their policy of building no new roads ever again in Wales, and I call upon them to scrap their policy of bringing in road charging for using the motorway network. And isn't it interesting, Madam Deputy Speaker, that not one of the Labour members here is willing to stand up and defend their own Senedd government's policy?
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've already heard about the importance of the Welsh economy of tourism. Has my right honourable friend made any assessment of the impact on tourism which will be reflected and will disappear from Wales as a result of this blanket ban?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman makes a very interesting point, because not only are people now going to have to pay extra money to come into Wales as a result of the Welsh Labour government's tourism tax, but they're going to find it a lot slower to get around Wales as a result of the Welsh Labour government's speed limits. And in my own constituency of Monmouthshire, the Monmouthshire Labour Council have recently decided for the first time ever to bring in charges for people who want to use the shops on a Sunday over the Christmas period, meaning, Madam Deputy Speaker, that they want us to slow down, but they don't actually want us to stop.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Local authorities in Wales have had the opportunity to exempt roads and villages from a blanket application of a speed limit. Devon County Council has had less discretion. In May this year, 105 parishes in Devon applied to the County Council to have a 20-mile limit, but only 6 of the 105 were granted. Does the Minister accept that an opt-in system for 20-mile-per-hour zones depends on local authorities having enough funding to exercise the discretion?
Secretary of State.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, obviously his own party are actually in charge in Paris. I'm not sure if he was aware of that. But the reality is that local authorities across Wales do need more funding, and need more funding in order to be able to implement policies like this, which has cost £30 million. And the Welsh Labour government are diverting money away from local authorities so that they can spend it on their own pet schemes, which include extra Senedd members.
Ruth Jones.
Madam Deputy Speaker. That's why I'm bringing it.
Secretary of State.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues regarding UK Government support for households in Wales, and I was therefore absolutely delighted that at the autumn statement the Chancellor announced a 9.8% rise in the national living wage, providing an extra £1,800 to the annual earnings of full-time workers.
Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And we're all thinking of the lovely Glenys Kinnock and her family, especially the Honourable Member for Aberavon at this time. But the number of emergency food parcels distributed by the Trussell...
Order. Does it occur to honourable members that when they're speaking at normal speaking tone rather than whispering, while a member is asking a question, that it's really rude and discourteous? Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The number of emergency food parcels distributed by Trussell Trust Food Banks in Newport West is on the rise. In 2018, the number of parcels distributed was 1,971. In the same period this year, over 3,000 were distributed to families. There was nothing in the autumn statement that would make this situation better. Why not?
Well, yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, I must, with respect, disagree with the Honourable Lady. The fact that inflation has been halved is obviously going to be a benefit to anyone receiving food parcels. The fact that there's been a cut in national insurance is going to be beneficial to people. The fact that there's been an increase in the living wage is going to be beneficial to people. The fact that pensions and benefits are going up in line with inflation is going to be beneficial to people in her constituency. What is not going to be beneficial to her constituents is the Welsh Labour government wanting to spend over £100 million creating extra Senedd members, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Oliver Hield.
The Minister will be aware that the UK-EU Parliamentary Partnership Assembly has been meeting in Westminster this week. And one of the things which was particularly made clear by the co-chair, Nathalie Loiseau, MEP was that Glenys Kinnock had made a huge contribution in the European Parliament, particularly in advocating women's rights, and that it was something that she particularly wanted to record. So it's not just in this Parliament that she'll be remembered for her role in politics. But does he agree with me that cutting national insurance contributions, the improvement to the national living wage and the cutting of inflation are crucial to Welsh households as they are across the UK?
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I agree with my right honourable friend on all of those points? First of all, that Glenys Kinnock has made an enormous contribution to politics in this country, as has her husband, to whom we send our condolences, as is her son, who at this very moment is also working very hard to support steelmaking in South Wales, and it's a pleasure to work with him on the transition board in Port Talbot, even though we have some disagreements from time to time on political matters. So may I add to the tributes and support everything he said, and of course agree with him that the recent changes made in the autumn statement are going to be beneficial to people in Wales.
Elaine Saxby.
Question 7, please, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I have regular, in fact frequent conversations with Cabinet colleagues and stakeholders to support the floating offshore wind industry, which will create high-quality jobs in Wales. The Government fully supports plans for up to 4 gigawatts of floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea and is working to bring forward an additional 12 gigawatts through the 2030s, with the potential to bring forward up to £20 billion worth of investment.
Elaine Saxby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Previous offshore wind developments on England's east coast have shown that appropriate planning is needed to minimise disruption to communities. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the development of floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea should see single cable corridors, one to his side of the water and just one to the north coast of Devon or Cornwall, to reduce environmental and societal disruption?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that the electricity systems operator are currently reviewing the design of connections for offshore wind projects. I met last week, possibly earlier this week, with the Crown Estate, and also have been meeting with National Grid to discuss some of the issues around cabling and the reconfiguration of the grid. But the actual decision as to where the cables would go and how many of them there are going to be is a fairly technical one, which I fear I'm not really qualified to take a view on myself. But I can assure the honourable lady that I know Crown Estates and National Grid would be more than happy to talk to her about that particular issue.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his response to that question? Minister, any onshore and offshore wind in the Celtic Sea will affect, of course, those fishermen in Northern Ireland as well. Can I have an assurance from the Minister when it comes to any plans for offshore wind, that the fishing organisations in Northern Ireland and down in Scotland and Wales will all have an input into where that happens, so that when it comes to fishing, that they won't be affected?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable gentleman makes a very good point that obviously in sparking a floating offshore wind industry, there are certain challenges that need to be dealt with amongst various other government departments. The honourable gentleman has made reference to one. I can assure him I've already had informal discussions about that, and we'll be looking to have more formal discussions with DEFRA and other government departments to make sure that we can overcome all of the challenges that are there and create a vibrant, sustainable industry for the future.
Alex Cunningham.
Question number 8, please.
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues on a variety of issues, including on the cost of energy bills. The Government recognises the challenges posed by the cost of living pressures, which is why we are providing £3,700 per household on average over 22 to 2025 to support households and individuals with the cost of living.
Alex Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister may not be aware of the very successful Warm Wales programme in the noughties, which saw tens of thousands of homes have their cavities and lofts insulated, saving residents in Neath, Port Talbot and Wrexham hundreds of pounds every year. Does the Government recognise that concentrated schemes of this nature have a major impact on fuel poverty? And will Minister steal our plans, which will see hundreds of thousands more households benefit?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm well aware that there are a number of renewable energy schemes that could have a positive benefit on householders in Wales, which is why the UK Government have been so supporting of the potential for floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea, why we recently, during the last round, arranged higher strike prices for tidal energy. So we're looking at a wide range of renewable energy systems that can bring benefits to people in Wales, and at the same time recognising the cost of living pressures. The UK Government has made sure we were paying around half the average fuel bills for homeowners during the last winter period.
Alexander Stafford.
Question 9, please, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week I had the pleasure of talking to farmers at the Royal Welsh Winter Fair and livestock markets in Sennybridge and Talabont in my own constituency. The UK Government is committed to backing Welsh farming, most notably by allocating over £900 million to the Welsh Government. This delivers on our manifesto commitment to maintain funding to farmers and land managers at 2019 levels.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Farmers across the UK, from those in the country of Wales to the village of Wales and Rother Valley, face increasing pressures. The Minister will know that I'm holding my next Farmers Forum with the Farming Minister early next year in Rother Valley. But what is she doing to support farmers in the country of Wales, farmers in the village of Wales and Rother Valley, and farmers across the whole of Rother Valley and the whole of the UK?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate my honourable friend on his work ensuring that the voice of farming is heard by the Minister. My honourable friend, like me, understands that farmers across this country are the beating heart of the rural economy, driving growth in rural constituencies like mine, which I must say is in stark contrast to the attitude of the party opposite in Wales, who have already cut £37 million from the Welsh agriculture budget. We wait with trepidation, Madam Deputy Speaker, to see what damage they will do to Welsh farmers next week.
Alexander Stephen Doughty.
With the Minister.
I think it just proves a point that members are not paying the least bit of attention to this colleague who is about to speak, who couldn't even hear his name being called. It's really rude to keep on talking when someone else is trying to ask an important question. Stephen Doughty.
Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you for your generosity, and may I also pay tribute to my very good friends in the Kinnock family on the loss of Glenys, who was a dear friend to all of us, and also on the sad death of the former member for Rhondda. Can I ask the Secretary of State, constituents in Cardiff South and Penarth, number 11...
He really has to do number 11. Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Here. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. This is going well. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With your permission, I will answer questions 11 and 12 together. The UK Government is committed to building a strong rail infrastructure network across Wales, which will improve connectivity and drive economic growth.
Seeing Cardiff South and Penarth want to see a station built in St Mellons Parkway. That will require important work on the South Wales main line for relief lines. Will she meet with me and colleagues with the Rail Minister to make sure that important national investment is done to ensure that station can go ahead?
I'd be delighted to meet with the honourable gentleman to discuss that and the investment that the UK Government is already putting into rail infrastructure in Wales.
Chris Armour.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State and the Minister should know that I've campaigned for years to close the dangerous level crossing in Pencoed in my Ogmore constituency. There's been no levelling up funding, no transport bid funding approved for any of those applications. Can the Minister please talk to DfT officials to resolve this, rather than allowing DfT officials to keep announcing more and more rail services, which is closest the crossing by stealth? It's not acceptable for my constituents.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I worked very well with the honourable gentleman when I was in the Government Whip's office, and I very much look forward to doing so. So I will certainly write to him and offer a meeting to discuss that.
Order. That concludes questions to the Secretary of State for Wales. And just before we proceed to Prime Minister's questions, many colleagues have asked me to pass on their best wishes to Mr. Speaker in his absence. I'm happy to inform the House that although Mr. Speaker has tested positive for COVID and therefore can't be present here in the chamber, he is rapidly getting better, and just as soon as that little test shows negative, he'll be straight back here in his chair. Thank you. And so we proceed to questions to the Prime Minister. Sir Michael Fabricant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Question number 1.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I welcome you to your place, and I know the whole House will wish the Speaker a speedy recovery. And before I answer my honourable friend's question, I know the whole House will also want to join me in offering our condolences to the family and friends of Alistair Darling, Glenys Kinnock and Lord James Douglas Hamilton. They made each an enormous contribution to public life and will be deeply missed. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Hillsborough families have suffered multiple injustices. The loss of 97 lives, the blaming of the fans and the unforgivable institutional defensiveness by public bodies. I am profoundly sorry for what they have been through. Today, the government has published its response to Bishop James Jones's report to ensure the pain and the suffering of the Hillsborough families is not repeated. I'm immensely grateful they have shared their experiences. I hope to meet them in the new year, and the Justice Secretary will be making an oral statement after PMQs. Turning to honourable friend's question, the government is continuing to work closely with the Mayor of the West Midlands to fully develop his plans to deliver growth.
Sir Michael Fabricant.
Well, firstly, may I join the Prime Minister in his comments about the Hillsborough families. It's thanks to Margaret Thatcher and her robust treatment of militant trade unions in the West Midlands, her contribution of £10 billion at today's prices to the motor industry in the West Midlands, that iconic names like Jaguar and Land Rover still exist. So does the Prime Minister share my boundless joy that on the road to Damascus, and in recognition of her great heritage and all that she achieved, another fanboy has joined her great belief, the leader of the opposition.
Prime Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman is a fantastic champion of his area, and because of the pro-business policies of this government, I'm delighted to see the billions of pounds of investment by JLR in their move towards electrification in the region. But he is absolutely right. I am always happy to welcome new Thatcherites from all sides of this House. But it does say something about the Leader of the Opposition that the main female strong leader that he could praise is Margaret Thatcher and not his own fantastic deputy.
Since question 1 was a closed question, we now go to question 2, Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Question number 2.
Madam Deputy Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government is set to close the Household Support Scheme in March, cutting off crucial free meals for 12,000 Rotherham's children in the lowest income families. With the government's cost of living crisis in full swing and energy prices about to increase again, how does the Prime Minister justify taking food from the mouths of my poorest children?
Madam Deputy Speaker, what we are doing is ensuring that no child should grow up in poverty, and that's why not only this year we've provided considerable cost of living support worth over £3,000 to a typical household, more support this winter for pensioners, a record increase in the national living wage, and a full indexation and uplifting of welfare for the next financial year. But when it comes to children and food, Madam Deputy Speaker, not only do we fund the free school meals for almost 2 million children, we also introduced the Holiday Activity and Food Programme, which provides not just food but enriching activities to deprived children up and down the entire country, including in her local authority.
Caroline Ansell.
If there is one place where everyone should feel safe, it's in their own home. But the reality is that for some of the most vulnerable people, home is precisely where they can be most at risk. terrorised by criminals who target them, move in, take control, and set up a base camp from where they sell drugs or facilitate prostitution in a horrendous form of exploitation known as cuckooing. It has happened in Eastbourne, and it is happening across the country. It is not an offence, but it should be, and wasn't cited in the Criminal Justice Bill debated last week. So can I ask my right honourable friend and the Home Secretary if they would meet with me and concerned colleagues to further discuss the issue?
Right.
I agree with my honourable friend that cuckooing is an abhorrent practice that does often prey on the most vulnerable in society. As part of the government's antisocial behaviour action plan, the Home Office engaged with relevant stakeholders about whether a new criminal offence was necessary. The results of that engagement demonstrated that there are a range of existing powers that can be used to disrupt this activity, but of course I'll ensure that the relevant minister meets with her and updates on the work we are doing to share effective practice to tackle this abhorrent problem.
Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's very good to see you in your place, and we wish the Speaker a speedy recovery. This week we lost two giants of the Labour family, and I thank the Prime Minister for his comments. Alistair Darling was a man of unassuming intelligence, warmth and kindness. He brought a calm expertise and, in private, a cutting wit, and devoted his love of his family was ever present. Our thoughts are with Maggie, his wife, Callum, Anna, who he loved so dearly. Glenys Kinnock was a passionate campaigner for social justice who changed lives home and abroad. She was a loving and supportive partner and mother, and her death is a huge loss to all of us. We are thinking of Neil, of Stephen, Rachel, and of all the family. Can I also echo the Prime Minister's comments in relation to Lord Douglas Hamilton and in relation to the Hillsborough families? They deserve justice. In a previous capacity, I worked with the families. They waited a very, very long time for the findings, thanks to people in this House, and they've waited a long time for this response, but I'm glad it is now coming. Madam Deputy Speaker, if the purpose of the Rwanda gimmick was to solve a political headache of the Tories' own making, to get people out of the country who they simply couldn't deal with, then it's been a resounding success. After all, they've managed to send 3 Home Secretaries there, an achievement for which the whole country can be grateful. So, apart from members of his own cabinet, how many people has the Prime Minister sent to Rwanda?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've been clear before, we will do everything it takes. Mr. Speaker, we will do everything it takes to get this scheme working so that we can indeed stop the boats. And that's why this week we have signed a new legally binding treaty with Rwanda, which together with new legislation will address all the concerns that have been raised, because everyone should be in no doubt about our absolute commitment to stop the boats and get flights off. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, and this is the crucial point that the Honourable Gentleman doesn't understand, deterrence is critical. Even the National Crime Agency have said that you need an effective removals and deterrence agreement if you truly want to break the cycle of tragedy that we see. But what we heard this morning from his own ministers was that they would scrap the scheme even when it is operational and working. Once again, Mr. Speaker, once again, instead of being on the side of the British people, he finds himself on the side of the people smugglers.
Madam Deputy Speaker, when they first announced this gimmick, they claimed Rwanda would settle tens of thousands of people. Then the Deputy former Prime Minister quickly whittled it down to mere hundreds. Then the Court of Appeal in June made clear there's housing for just 100. The current number of people sent there remains stubbornly consistent, 0. At the same time, Madam Deputy, Article 19 of the treaty says the parties shall make arrangements for the United Kingdom to resettle a portion of Rwanda's most vulnerable refugees in the United Kingdom. So how many refugees from Rwanda will be coming here to the UK under the treaty?
Mr. Speaker, what? Madam Deputy Speaker, sorry.
Order! Prime Minister.
It addresses all the concerns of the Supreme Court. But it's a point of pride, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we are a compassionate country that does welcome people from around the world. But let me just get the honourable gentleman up to speed on what we are doing. Reduce the number of illegal arrivals from Albania by 90%. Increase the number of illegal working raids by 50%. Because of all the action, we've taken the number of small boat arrivals down by a third, Madam Deputy Speaker. But what is the honourable gentleman's plan? Because it comes down to he just simply doesn't have a plan to address this problem. But no, I'm probably being unfair because he does have a plan. It's to cook up a deal with the EU that would see us accept 100,000 illegal migrants.
Sir Keir Starmer.
Migration's trebled on his watch, and all he can do is make up numbers about the Labour Party. It's really pitiful. I'm not actually sure the Prime Minister can have read this thing. Article 4 says the scheme is capped at Rwanda's capacity. That's 100. Article 5 says Rwanda can turn them away if they want. Article 19 says we actually have to take refugees from Rwanda. How much did this fantastic deal cost us?
Prime Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Home Secretary was crystal clear about, there is no incremental money. There is no incremental money that has been provided. This about is ensuring that the concerns of the Supreme Court have all been addressed in a legally binding treaty that will allow us to operationalise the scheme. But I'm glad he raised the topic of legal migration, which I agree is absolutely far too high, Madam Deputy Speaker. That's why this week we've outlined a plan bigger than any other government before to reduce the levels of legal migration by £300. It's an incredibly comprehensive plan. So if he cares so much about it, the simple question for him is, does he support the plan?
Madam Deputy Speaker, he clearly hasn't read it. Annex A says on top of the 140 million he's already showered on Rwanda, when we send people there under this treaty, we have to pay for their accommodation and their upkeep for 5 years. And that's not all. This morning, a government minister admitted that anyone we send to Rwanda who commits a crime can be returned to us. I'm beginning to see why the Home Secretary said the Rwanda scheme is something to do with bats, I think, wasn't it? What does he first think attracted Mr Kagame to hundreds of millions of pounds for nothing in return?
Listen, I've slightly lost the thread of the question, Madam Deputy Speaker, but the simple point is, there's a simple question here. If you believe in stopping the boats, as we on this side of the House do, you need to have an effective deterrence and returns agreement. It's as simple as that. The honourable gentleman is not interested in stopping the boats, which is why he's not interested in the Rwanda plan. In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, we know that they don't want to tackle this issue because even when this government was trying to deport foreign national offenders out of this country, they opposed it. Multiple members of his shadow front bench all signed a letter to me to that effect. But I don't need to tell him that because he signed it too.
Okay, that's enough. Sir Keir Starmer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would say that this treaty's got more holes in than a Swiss cheese, but I don't want to wind up the Prime Minister by talking about a European country again. Madam Deputy Speaker, you have to give credit to the Rwandan government. They saw this Prime Minister coming a mile off. You can only imagine their delight, their sheer disbelief, when having already banked £140 million of British taxpayer money without housing a single asylum seeker, the Prime Minister appears again with another offer they can't refuse. A gimmick that will send taxpayers' money to Rwanda, refugees from Rwanda to Britain, and won't stop the boats. It was mentioned of Margaret Thatcher earlier. Madam Deputy Speaker,
understandable excitement about the mention of name. But the House must listen to the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer.
Party go from up yours to laws to take our money, Kigami.
Mr. Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, when it comes to this European thing and Margaret Thatcher, this is the week that the Shadow Foreign Secretary, I think, didn't rule out rejoining the European Union. He can role-play Margaret Thatcher all he wants, but when it comes to Europe, his answer's the same. Yes, yes, yes!
Madam Deputy Speaker, forget the private jet. He's obviously on a private planet of his own. But as Daily Mail readers learned this week that the Prime Minister has begun to feel sorry for himself. He's even been heard comparing his plight to his beloved Southampton Football Club. I do think that's a bit harsh, because Saints have been on an 11-game unbeaten run, while, as the song has it, the Prime Minister gets battered everywhere he goes. But if you want the perfect example of how badly the Tories have broken the asylum system, last week the Home Office admitted that 17,000 people in the asylum system...
Order! Order, come on. Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you. If you want the perfect example of how badly they've broken the asylum system, Madam Deputy Speaker, last week the Home Office admitted that 17,000 people in the asylum system have disappeared. Their exact words, it's hard to believe this, we don't think we know where all these people are. Now, you might lose your car keys, you might lose your headphones, you might lose your marbles. How do you lose 17,000 people?
Prime Minister!
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I mean, on the topic of football teams, he used to describe this Rwanda policy as immoral, and yet his football team has a Visit Rwanda badge on the side of them. But in the week when he made his big economy speech, we're still waiting to hear how he's going to borrow £28 billion and still cut taxes and reduce debt. It's same old thing. The sums don't add up. But while they're struggling with their calculator, we're getting on and delivering. A new treaty with Rwanda, the toughest ever measures to cut legal migration, our schools marching up the tables, and tax cuts for millions, Madam Deputy Speaker. So whether it's controlling our borders or lowering our taxes, just like the Saints, the Conservatives are marching on.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm getting fed up with sitting in traffic jams in my constituency caused by contractors digging up roads, involving lane closures and temporary traffic lights, often invoking utility company emergency powers that turn out not to be emergencies, and often with no sign of anybody doing any work, particularly over weekends. So I set up a campaign to name and shame these inconsiderate contractors. But it turns out that when they cause all this chaos, when they breach the rules of their permit, the maximum penalty is an £80 fixed penalty notice. So will the Prime Minister back my campaign and support better enforcement and realistic levels of fine?
Well, my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and that's why we've set aside £8 billion as a result of our plans on HS2, Madam Deputy Speaker, which is enough to resurface over 5,000 miles of road to improve journeys, a cornerstone of our plan. But also, we are introducing a range of measures, as the Honourable Gentleman says, to reduce congestion from roadworks. Contained in the plan for drivers is a scheme for greater fines and penalties to ensure that works do finish on time, and I'll make sure that we look at his suggestion, and I wholeheartedly back his campaign.
Leader of the Scottish Nationalists, Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Is the Prime Minister worried that he is projected to be the first Conservative Party leader to lose a general election to a fellow Thatcherite?
really must hear the Prime Minister, and we've got a lot of questions to get through. It's not the Prime Minister's opponents who are giving him trouble. Prime Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I say to the honourable gentleman, Margaret Thatcher's view was cut inflation, then cut taxes, and then win an election, and that's very much my plan.
Of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not just in relation to Margaret Thatcher where the Tory and Labour leader appear to agree. The same is true of the government's latest migration policies. Now, for those of us on these benches, we aren't afraid to say that we believe migration is a good thing. It enriches our communities, it enriches our economy, it enriches our universities, our schools, our health service and, of course, our care sector. So in that regard, can I ask the Prime Minister, why does he think it is acceptable to ask people to come to these shores to care for our family members, whilst we show complete disregard for theirs? What has become of this place?
Well, Madam Speaker, it's completely wrong. No, as we've already said, we have a proud track record of welcoming those who are most vulnerable around the world. Over 500,000 over the past few years from Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Hong Kong and elsewhere, and that's what this country will always do. But at the same time, when it comes to economic migration and other forms, it's absolutely right that we take strong action to curb the levels that we have seen, because they are simply far too high and place unsustainable pressure on our public services. And, Madam Speaker, I make no apology for saying that, or indeed saying that it is important that those who come here contribute to our public services.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I first of all welcome the Government's significant funding increase for two-year-olds preschooling in 2023. But the illustrative 24-25 DFE funding to Dorset Council for two-year-olds preschooling is looking to be a net 17 pence per hour less than it is today, and it is giving West Dorset preschools some nervousness about their sustainability. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, support me to ensure that educational funding formulas for this will be taking into account the challenges of rural living and allow excellent preschools to...
We've got it. Prime Minister.
Deputy Speaker, in a couple of years' time, we'll have increased spending to over £8 billion every year on free hours and early education, which will help working families with childcare costs. Indeed, it's the single biggest investment in childcare in England ever. But my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and that's why we will ensure that there is a discretionary supplement in the local authorities' local funding formula for rural communities to account for the smaller economies of scale and ensure that they can continue to deliver their very vital work.
Stephen Ferry.
9 months on from the Windsor Framework, I thank the Prime Minister for his ongoing efforts to restore the Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive. However, if and when the institutions are restored, they will still be plagued by the same structural weaknesses that have seen repeated collapses and unfairness around things like designations. This week, the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee published a report calling for a review of the Good Friday Agreement. Many architects of the agreement, such as Tony Blair, John Major and Bertie Ahern, have recognised the case for reform. So can the Prime Minister commit to an early review of the agreement to improve its stability, effectiveness and fairness?
Prime Minister.
I recognise the honourable member's campaigning on this issue, and I've got great respect for his position. Indeed, we've spoken on a number of occasions, both here and on my visits to Northern Ireland. My focus right now is on getting the institutions up and running, and my overarching priority is to get public services back on track in Northern Ireland, which I know is an ambition that he and I share. Any reform of institutions are best dealt with the support of all parts of the community. But when it comes to restoring the current institutions, the government is doing everything it can to support efforts, and I know the Secretary of State will be in touch and engagement with the parties imminently on that point.
Nick Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, 13 men died by suicide. Today, 88 men will die of heart disease. Tomorrow, and every day, 90,000 men will wake up in prison. And we have 2.2 million boys living today at home with no dad. We thankfully have an excellent Cabinet Minister for Women. We have an excellent Minister for Women. So will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss the merits of a Minister for Men and Boys? Because, as Warren Farrell states, when one sex loses, both sex lose.
Yeah. Can I say to my honourable friend that he should be commended for his tireless campaigning on this issue. He's particularly right to focus on suicide, and that's why I'm grateful for his engagement with the suicide prevention strategy, which sets out the actions that we will take to reduce suicides in the coming years. But it's also a thanks partly into his campaigning that on International Men's Day, we announced that we're appointing the first men's health ambassador and launching a men's health task force, and I look forward to continued collaboration with him so that we can represent his concerns adequately.
Simon Lightwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Convicted criminals are being held in police station cells across West Yorkshire because this government has completely failed to deliver more prison places. Two-thirds of prisons overcrowded, criminals let out early, if sentenced at all, only 2% of rapists reaching court, serious violence up 60%, knife crime up by 70%, and nearly 65,000 cases waiting to be heard. So, Prime Minister, how can you reassure the residents of Wakefield that they are safe on our streets?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have a clear plan to protect victims, punish criminals and cut crime. We're investing £400 million more, in fact, in prison places, on top of the £4 billion that I announced as Chancellor, which is delivering 20,000 new cells. We're also making sure that rapists serve every day of their sentences and ensuring that life means life for the worst offenders, something that I hope that the Labour Party will be supporting soon.
Sir Oliver Heald.
My constituents, Kerry and Francis Menai-Davis, are in the public gallery today, and they lost their son after a long battle with cancer where they visited him in hospital every day. They've set up a charity called It's Never You to help parents in that situation, and on Monday I intend to present a bill which would ask the government to report on what support can be given to parents in that situation, and I hope he might ask ministers to discuss this with me so that we can find a way forward to help parents in this dreadful situation.
Well, can I express my sympathies to my royal friends' constituents for what they have been through and commend them for setting up the It's Never You charity. I will ensure that the organisers and he get the appropriate meeting with the Minister to discuss their important work. He's absolutely right. Parents that are in that situation should have all the support that they need, and we'll make sure that that happens.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 1 in 5 of my residents live in fuel poverty, and this winter looks to be the most brutal yet, according to Cornwall Insights, with the current trajectory in energy prices expected to be the new norm for the rest of the decade. As the Prime Minister will know, one of the best ways to support households would be the introduction of a social tariff. He promised a consultation by summer this year. We're still waiting. When will the consultation be released?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we've also provided considerable support in the here and now for households with their energy bills. £900 of direct cost of living support this financial year on top of a record increase in benefits, along with winter fuel payments of up to £300 this winter for pensioners because they're particularly vulnerable. And we will continue to look at all support that we have to ensure that those who need it are getting the help that they deserve.
Andrew Selous.
COP28, will the Prime Minister salute South West Bedfordshire's contribution to our nation's energy security for having had the tallest wind turbine in England, the largest battery in Europe, and now the most powerful wind turbine in England, which has local support? And can we also ensure that my constituents now get cheaper energy bills for hosting this vital infrastructure?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can say that we are looking exactly at how local communities can benefit when new infrastructure is in their vicinity as part of our new plan for increased energy security. But also, can I commend his local area for the contribution they're making to our clean energy transition? It's a great example of this country's fantastic track record in delivering net zero and decarbonising faster than any other major economy. Not something that you'll hear from the party opposite, but something that we on this side of the House are very proud of.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government failed on their legal duty to publish a report on spiking by April, stating that they were reconsidering whether their rationale for not introducing a specific offence for spiking was sound. Will the Prime Minister clarify when and if this spiking report will ever be published? And does he agree with me and colleagues right across this House that the only sound approach to this issue is to create a specific criminal offence for spiking?
Madam Deputy Speaker, this is an issue that has been reviewed by legal police colleagues. My latest understanding is that the existing laws did cover the offence of spiking, but of course I'm happy to ensure that she gets a letter which explains the position.
Paul Holmes.
Yeah. Very kind. Not content with being the third most indebted council in England with a debt of 670 million, Lib Dem Eastleigh Borough Council recently refinanced their failed One Horton Heath housing project to the tune of £148 million with no houses built and interest payments of £386,000 per month. Will the Prime Minister now ask Dulac to intervene and independently investigate this development and ask for a meeting with the Minister relevant to discuss this terrible decision by Eastleigh Borough Council?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am aware that some local authorities, including the one he mentioned, have taken excessive risks with borrowing and investment practices. That's why we've taken a range of measures to strengthen the regulatory framework to prevent this from happening, and that includes new powers that make it quicker and easier for the government to step in when councils do take on excessive risks through borrowing. I'll ensure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to raise his concerns, because his constituents deserve better.
Mary Glendon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. National Energy Action says 13% of North Tynesiders are in fuel poverty. 3,000 homes have legacy prepayment meters, and we are in the bottom 5% for energy efficiency. But the Chancellor announced no new funding to help people this winter. We're now in Advent, so what Christmas message does the Prime Minister have for my constituents who are freezing in their homes?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've outlined, we've provided considerable support for particularly vulnerable families this year and through this winter. We're also investing record sums in improving the energy efficiency and insulation of vulnerable homes through our home upgrade scheme, and indeed the Warm Homes discount, which on average can save people hundreds of pounds in their energy bills when they receive that support, and we're expanding those programmes across the country, including in the North East.
Flick Drummond.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The International Criminal Court prosecutor, Karim Khan, KC, has concluded his first visit to Israel and Palestine and stated we must show that the law is there on the front lines and it's capable of protecting all. What support will Britain offer to the International Criminal Court to conduct investigations into the conduct of all parties in Israel, Gaza and the West Bank before and since October the 7th?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, as is well known, we are a strong and long-standing supporter of the International Criminal Court. When it comes to the situation in Gaza, we have been consistent in saying that international humanitarian law has to be respected. All parties must take every possible step to avoid harming civilians, and I can say that I stressed this point specifically just yesterday to Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank you. The Prime Minister is aware that the household tax known as the television licence fee is due to rise in April in line with inflation. Given the ongoing household budget constraints that all our constituents are faced with, increasing childcare costs as well as ongoing unresolved staffing issues at BBC Northern Ireland, National BBC Television, National BBC Radio, is now not the right time to proceed with an even larger £3.7 billion licence fee budget enhanced yet again?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have already agreed a fair settlement with the BBC that will see the licence fee remain frozen until 2024. I think the honourable member raises an excellent point, and I've been clear that the licence fee in the BBC needs to be realistic about what is possible in an environment like this, and it should only rise at a level that people can actually afford. The Culture Secretary has said we're looking at this issue right now, and she'll set out more detail in due course.
Jack Burton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Longton, which is the largest town in my constituency, has not benefited from future high streets funding, from town deals, or the latest long-term plan for towns. So will my right honourable friend ensure that we can have some investment into Longton from the government, and particularly does he agree with me that the latest award of HLF money to Stoke-on-Trent, some of that should definitely be invested in Longton?
My honourable friend is a tireless champion for his local community, and I know there has been considerable investment in his area over the past few years in lots of different ways. He makes an excellent point about making sure that nobody misses out from the considerable resources that are being invested in Stoke, and I'll ensure that the Levelling Up Department takes his concerns very seriously.
we are running way over time, but I appreciate it would be great disappointment to people whose names are on the order paper if they're not called. So I'm trying my best to call everyone whose name is on the order paper, but I make a plea for brevity, please. Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you. When the Prime Minister is taking a dip in his pool or he's on the beach at his place in California, he doesn't have to worry about swimming in sewage. The rest of us don't have it so good. So why won't he back Labour's plans for criminal liability for water company bosses who failed to clean up their act?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we've already brought forward regulations that ensure there can be unlimited fines for water companies, and there have been dozens of criminal prosecutions. But what I would say is, when we had a plan, when we had a debate in this House on exactly a plan that would do all of this, who didn't show up to vote? It was the Labour Party.
James Sunderland.
Very good point. Madam Deputy Speaker, in recent weeks I have seen firsthand the extraordinary work conducted by specialist care staff at accident and emergency. As politicians, we are often guilty of using the NHS as a political football, but when it becomes personal, one is reminded that what we have in the UK is very special. Will the Prime Minister join me in simply thanking our superb NHS staff in Bracknell, across Berkshire, in neighbouring Basingstoke and Britting Park hospitals and beyond?
Madam Deputy Speaker, NHS staff are at the heart of what makes our health service work. There wouldn't be an NHS without them. Their skill, their expertise, their dedication. I was delighted that I could pay them my thanks last week in person, and I join my honourable friend in thanking NHS staff, not just in his constituency, but right across the country, for their dedicated hard work and public service.
Dame Nia Griffith.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, it's now 6 years since Bishop James Jones published the Hillsborough Report, and only today, finally, do we get the government response. But when will the government introduce not just a voluntary charter or an independent public advocate or a code for ethical policing, but a full Hillsborough law to force those in public office to cooperate fully with investigations and to guarantee fairer funding for those affected by major tragedy to challenge public institutions?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've said, I'm profoundly sorry for what the Hillsborough families have been through, and as I said, my honourable friend, the Justice Secretary, will be making a full statement immediately after PMQs.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I refer members to my registered members' interest. As someone who has worked as a junior doctor, I understand it's a demanding job and I have sympathy with the challenges they face. However, the strikes that are planned over the festive period threaten public safety and they will delay people's treatment. Causing patient suffering in the pursuit of more money for oneself is, in my view, morally indefensible. Can the Prime Minister tell the House what concrete steps he is taking to prevent these strikes and whether he'll bring forward minimum service legislation to protect patients in case they do?
My honourable friend makes an excellent point and speaks from a position of experience on this issue. The government has now reached settlements with every other part of the public sector, including most recently consultants, and I'm grateful to them for their constructive engagement with the government. The junior doctors are taking action in the face of a recommendation from an independent body of a 9% pay rise on average, the highest increase across the entire public sector. The government has gone beyond that in conversations with them, and they have still decided to take damaging strike action. It is wrong, and that is why we've introduced minimum service levels to ensure that we can guarantee a safe level of care for patients across the NHS. And it would be good to hear at some point from the Labour Party whether we'll get off the fence, condemn these strikes, and back these minimum service laws.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Universal credit is broken. One constituent tells me that DWP is refusing to reimburse her childcare payments because it was 4 days late due to her phone being broken. She's down £1,200, unable to pay for childcare. She has lost her job and is likely to have to move house. With 3 weeks to go before Christmas, she is extremely anxious and distressed. Does the Prime Minister realise the real consequences for real people of this broken system?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sorry to hear about the circumstances of the Honourable Lady's constituent, and if she writes, I'll make sure that we get specific support in place for her and ensure that she gets access to what she needs. But when it comes to universal credit, I do strongly disagree with her, in fact. It was only because of the actions of the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green that universal credit was implemented, and it is the only reason we were able to get support to millions of vulnerable people through the pandemic. It was because we replaced the legacy system with universal credit that was possible, and it was opposed at every step by the Labour Party.
Simon Baines.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is always a pleasure to work closely with my right honourable friend, the member for Montgomeryshire, in delivering important projects like the Llanamannock Pant bypass on the border with North Shropshire, and today is another example of our partnership. As my right honourable friend is unfortunately unable to ask a question in his role as the Prime Minister's PPS, would the Prime Minister join me in highlighting his work with the FUW, the Farmers Union of Wales, in organising the terrific celebrations of Montgomeryshire Day in the Jubilee Room straight after questions?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend is an excellent campaigner for his constituents, as indeed is the right honourable friend, the member for Montgomeryshire. It's fantastic to see these local projects being delivered in their area. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for teaching me how to pronounce the Pant Llanamannock bypass in my first budget, and I'm delighted to declare from the dispatch box that today is now officially Montgomeryshire Day, and I look forward to everyone celebrating in the Jubilee Room straight after questions. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Final question, Gerald Jones.
Madam Deputy Speaker, if I could beg your indulgence just briefly to wish my constituent attacked during yesterday's serious incident in Aberfan a speedy recovery, and thank the emergency services and school staff for their swift and professional response. Madam Deputy Speaker, Britain is getting smaller on the world stage under this Prime Minister's watch. His climate failures mean our children and grandchildren bearing the brunt of the costs. His plans undermining Britain's energy security. Bills are still sky high for working families, and yet he's hiking the tax burden and real living standards are falling by over 3%. Tinkering with a reset just isn't and doesn't compensate for 13 years of failure, does it, Prime Minister?
Deputy Speaker, first of all, can I say that my thoughts are with the victim and her family about the awful incident that took place on the streets of Aberfan. We wish them a full and speedy recovery, and I also join him in thanking the emergency services for their immediate response. But he talked about leaving our children and our grandchildren with costs. And he actually is right, Madam Deputy Speaker, to raise that, because that is important that we don't do that. And the question then for him and the party opposite is, why do they want to embark on a green borrowing spree of £28 billion a year that just means higher taxes for our children and our grandchildren, higher mortgage rates? It's the same old story, reckless borrowing and the British people paying the price.
Thank you. That concludes Prime Minister's questions. I'm pausing for a moment to allow members to leave and to take up new places, as we now have an important statement. And now that everyone is in place, I would ask members who are leaving to do so quietly, to do so quietly, please. A little bit of politeness to others goes a long way. Statement, the Lord Chancellor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And with permission, I would like to make a statement on the Government's response to Bishop James Jones's report, The Patronising Disposition of Unaccountable Power, a report to ensure the pain and suffering of the Hillsborough families is not repeated, and on the steps we will take to respond to the points of learning contained therein. Madam Deputy Speaker, Bishop James has done our nation a great service, and his report is an exceptional piece of work. I want to salute the Hillsborough families for the assiduous care that they have given to help create this report and forge the response that flows from it. I had the privilege of meeting many of the families in Liverpool in June this year, alongside the former Home Secretary. I was deeply moved to hear of their experiences and by the dignity with which they shared them. But perhaps even more affecting was their unflinching determination to make sense of the senseless and bring about change for others. That is the true mark of compassion, campaigning selflessly for change, knowing that nothing that any government can do will bring back their own loved ones or temper their grief. The Hillsborough families have, through their determined efforts over decades, created a lasting legacy, a national legacy, that is a tribute to their loved ones. At the start of his report, Bishop James expressed his hope that we might be a better nation for having listened to them. We are, and they deserve the thanks of our nation. Second, I also pay tribute to those in this House who continue to campaign on behalf of the Hillsborough families and for families bereaved by other tragedies, including the member for Garston and Halewood, Halton, Wirral South and Liverpool West Derby. I thank former members of the House who have given important support to the families, including Steve Rotherham and Andy Burnham, and I of course thank the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead. Quite apart, and I thank Glenn Taylor, indeed, for his vital work on the ongoing independent forensic pathology review. Quite apart from its important recommendations, Bishop James's report laid bare the truly devastating experiences of those bereaved by the Hillsborough disaster on the 15th of April 1989. An unimaginable tragedy unfolded. 97 innocent men, women and children ultimately lost their lives. Hundreds more were injured and traumatised by what they saw. But for Hillsborough's bereaved and survivors, that terrible day was only day one of an enduring ordeal. And in the days and decades thereafter, it became clear they suffered a double injustice. First, there was the abject failure of the police and others at the ground to protect their loved ones, failures described in Lord Justice Taylor's 1990 report as, quote, blunders of the first magnitude. Then they faced years of unforgivable institutional defensiveness. Second, the Hillsborough's families and survivors suffered what can only be described as cruelty, as innocent fans were cynically blamed for their own deaths. But that, Madam Deputy Speaker, as was later to become clear, was a web of lies spun by those seeking to protect their own reputations. Now, I emphasise that point because although the disaster may have been over 34 years ago, these baseless narratives still inexplicably persist in some quarters today. So let me take this important opportunity to restate what is not a matter of opinion, but unassailable fact. Fans attending the Hillsborough Stadium on the 15th of April 1989 bear absolutely no responsibility for the deaths and injuries that occurred. And in making that statement, I echo what was said 7 years ago by my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, at this dispatch box when she read out the full findings of the second inquests, namely that 96 men, women and children were unlawfully killed. Since then, Andrew Devine, who suffered life-changing injuries at Hillsborough, passed away on the 27th of July 2021, becoming the 97th fatality of the disaster. I would like to place on record my deepest sympathies to Mr. Devine's family and friends, and indeed all those who lost loved ones. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government's response to Bishop James's report has been a long time coming, too long. For some of that time, it was necessarily held back to avoid prejudicing the outcomes of criminal trials, but there has been delay since, and I recognise that this has only compounded the pain of the Hillsborough families and survivors, and the Government apologises for that. As the House will be aware, the Government's response follows that of the police, which was published in January this year. Today, the Chief Coroner is also publishing his response, which relates to his leadership role regarding the coronial service, and collectively, these responses address the points raised by Bishop James. But this doesn't stop here. We will, of course, continue to listen to the families of those involved in all major incidents and their concerns. So turning to the report, it contains 25 points of learning. Whilst Bishop James said that he considered each to be vitally important, he was clear that 3 in particular were, in his words, crucial. So let me turn to those. First, he proposed the creation of a charter for families bereaved through public tragedy. Bishop James made clear that he wanted to, quote, help bring about cultural change through commitments to change, as he put it, related to transparency and acting in the public interest. It's worth reflecting that in setting out point of learning 13 regarding the Hillsborough law, which I will come on to, Bishop James said that he had drawn heavily on that law's principles in the drafting of this charter. So it is worth taking a moment to consider the language of that charter. It commits signatories the leaders of public bodies to strive to, 1, place the public interest above the reputation of their own organisations. 2, to approach all forms of public scrutiny, including public inquiries and inquests, with candour in an open, honest and transparent way. And 3, to avoid seeking to defend the indefensible. And I can tell the House that the Deputy Prime Minister has today signed what will be known as the Hillsborough Charter on behalf of the Government. Other signatories of the Charter include the National Police Chiefs Council on behalf of all 43 police forces, the College of Policing, the Crown Prosecution Service, the National Fire Chiefs Council and others. We want this Charter to become part of the culture of what it means to be a public servant in Britain. So the Deputy Prime Minister will be writing to all departments to ensure that everyone who works in government is aware of the Hillsborough Charter and what it means for the way that they work. A reference to the Charter will also be added to the central induction to the civil service for all new joiners. The Hillsborough Charter and indeed Bishop James's report have also been added to the curriculum for every recruit who joins the police. This Charter will now be indeed embedded in our public life. Now, the second crucial point of learning from Bishop James's report is what he described as the pressing need for proper participation of bereaved families at inquests. Now, inquests are, as we know, first and foremost about answering 4 questions: who, where, when and how an individual has died. But, as Bishop James highlighted, the Hillsborough families were let down by the very process that should have given them answers during the first inquests, and then they had to endure a second, which had been ordered by my right honourable friend. At the first inquests, the families were forced to fund their own legal representation, a single barrister between them. We recognise that proper involvement in an inquest will, in appropriate cases, mean that bereaved families should get legal representation, especially when the state is represented. And that's why changes have been made such that had the Hillsborough tragedy happened today, the families would have been eligible for free legal aid through the exceptional case funding scheme. The government is determined to make this process as straightforward as possible, and that is why in January 2022, the Ministry of Justice removed the means test for representation in relation to ECF cases, and in September 2023, the means test was also removed for legal advice at inquests. But we want to build on this progress. So I can announce today that we will consult on an expansion of legal aid for families bereaved through public disaster, where an independent public advocate is engaged, I'll come back to that, or in the aftermath of a terrorist incident. Now, I acknowledge that Bishop James talks broadly about the proper participation of bereaved families at inquests where the state is represented. We will seek to further understand the experiences of these individuals, and I would welcome a conversation with Bishop James on this early in the new year. We also support the principle raised in Bishop James's report that public bodies should not be able to spend limitless public funds on legal representation. And that's why we have for the first time set out a requirement on government departments to consider the number of lawyers instructed, bearing in mind the commitment to support an inquisitorial approach. And we will now go on to set out that central government public bodies should publish their spend on legal representation at inquests and inquiries, reaffirming that this spend should be proportionate and never excessive. We've also published a set of principles to guide how public bodies should instruct lawyers at inquests. These include a requirement to approach the inquest with openness and honesty, and to keep in mind that the bereaved should be at the heart of the inquest process. But we will also publish guidance to set the clear expectation that central government public bodies must instruct their lawyers in accordance with the principle of the Hillsborough Charter, because how lawyers engage with the inquest process, and indeed the bereaved families, matters. So I'll turn to the third of Bishop James's 3 crucial points of learning: a duty of candour for police officers. As he described it, there is a gap in police accountability arrangements for officers who fail to cooperate fully with investigations into alleged criminal offences or misconduct. That is why a new offence of police corruption, applicable to police and NCA officers, was introduced in 2017, punishable by up to 14 years imprisonment. In 2020, we updated the police conduct regulations to introduce a new duty to cooperate for individual officers during investigations and inquiries. Failure to do so can result in disciplinary sanctions, including dismissal. And last month, we introduced legislation to place an organisational duty of candour on policing. Through the Criminal Justice Bill, we will place a duty on the College of Policing to issue a code of practice for ethical policing, and for that code to include the duty of candour. This duty is designed to promote a culture of openness, honesty and transparency, and Chief Constables will be held to account for their force's performance against the Code. The new Code of Practice has been laid in Parliament today, and we want to go beyond the police, to consider healthcare settings too. Indeed, I can tell the House that in response to recent concerns about openness in those settings, we will also be conducting a review into the effectiveness of the existing duty of candour for health and social care providers. The terms of reference for that have been published today. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am aware that the Hillsborough law calls for a duty of candour on all public authorities. Now, since the Hillsborough disaster, a comprehensive framework of duties and obligations has developed which cover public officials and the different official proceedings, such as inquests and inquiries. First, in central government, the Civil Service Code requires civil servants to act with honesty and integrity. A breach of these codes can result in a range of potential sanctions, including dismissal. These sit alongside the Nolan principles, providing that holders of public office should act solely in terms of the public interest. Second, the legal framework surrounding criminal investigations, statutory inquiries, inquests, and most other formal proceedings requires that all individuals, regardless of whether or not they are a public official, cooperate with them. For example, there is a duty of candour in judicial review, which amounts to a duty on public authorities to lay cards face up on the table. And when it comes to inquiries, Madam Deputy Speaker, importantly, these carry the potential for custodial sanction, prison sentences in plain English. Third, where a public official demonstrates a lack of candour, where it forms part of their duty as a public office holder, they can potentially be guilty of misconduct in public office, which is a criminal offence. Now, we will keep these changes under review to ensure we achieve that culture of openness, honesty and candour, and we will not rule out taking further action if it is needed. Madam Deputy Speaker, today the Government responds to all 25 points of learning, but I've focused this statement on those which Bishop James described as crucial. Very meaningful progress has been made. We will not hesitate to go further if required, because the discussions will continue, and indeed the Government has committed to another debate in the new year to ensure that dialogue progresses, and I will also be happy to meet the Hillsborough family should they wish to discuss any aspect of the Government's response. But Madam Deputy Speaker, let me turn finally to a really important point, which is the improvements in the justice system. Because Bishop James made searingly clear that the justice system, which should have supported victims and the bereaved after the tragedy, was not set up to do so. Now, our response sets out the steps this government has taken to make sure that bereaved families and survivors in the immediate aftermath of a public tragedy are guided through what can be a difficult, complicated and forbidding process. Through the Victims and Prisoners Bill, we have introduced legislation to enable an independent public advocate. Once established, the IPA will be a strong voice for victims, the bereaved and whole communities affected by major incidents. The IPA, as promised by my right honourable friend, will make sure those affected by major incidents know their rights, can access support services and have their voices heard at inquests and inquiries. Its design has been informed by the very difficulties that the Hillsborough families faced and our commitment to making sure that other families do not suffer the same injustices. That can include holding public bodies to account for their commitments to abide by the Hillsborough Charter. I'm also grateful for the contributions of some of the families of victims of the Grenfell Tower fire and Manchester Arena bombing for their contributions, telling us what would have helped them most in the aftermath of those terrible events. And after listening to concerns of the Hillsborough family set out so powerfully when I met them earlier this year, as well as contributions from colleagues across the House, I'm looking at the Honourable Lady for Galston, thank you, and Hellwood, I decided that we must go further by establishing a permanent independent public advocate. It is vital that the advocate can be deployed as soon as possible after disaster strikes and that they have time in advance to be as prepared as possible. A permanent advocate will be able to advise the government on its response to major incidents, such as any subsequent inquiries or reviews, and will make sure the views of families are heard. They will also, importantly, report independently to government about the experiences of victims and bereaved families, as well as publishing an annual report. All such reports will be laid before Parliament. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Hillsborough families have been unrelenting in their pursuit of justice, and Bishop James has done essential work to support the families and faithfully discharge the commission put upon him by the then Home Secretary and former Prime Minister to capture their perspective so that it was not lost following the second inquests. Today is therefore an important day. It doesn't provide closure for the families, of course. As Bishop James himself wrote, there can be no closure to love, nor should there be for someone you have loved and lost. Grief is indeed a journey without a destination, but today is a milestone on that journey. It is a moment, I hope, when families will feel able to pause and take quiet pride in the enormity of what they have achieved, not for themselves, but for others, for the British people. But I hope they will serve to cement and strengthen the Hillsborough family's legacy, the changes they have made to benefit an entire nation, and to help ensure that never again can our people be so betrayed by the very organisations and institutions that are meant to protect them. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Shabana Mahmood.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is customary to thank the Government for advance sight of the statement, but I do have to say that given the gravity of this matter, the fact that the report that is being responded to has been with the Government for many years, and in fact the length of the Secretary of State's statement this morning, the fact that I am disappointed to have received the copy of the statement much later than is customary. Madam Deputy Speaker, to describe the events of 15th of April 1989 as far-reaching is wholly inadequate. To say they were tragic misses the point. The name Hillsborough stands to this day as an indictment of institutions, individuals, and an entire culture in which transparency, accountability, and even simple human compassion were absent. I was a child in 1989 when 95 people died at Hillsborough Stadium in the worst sporting disaster in this nation's history. 10 years later, alongside thousands of other law students, I learnt about the shockwaves that the events of that day were still sending through our courts, to the continuing pain of the families. This included the death in 1993 of the 96th victim, 22-year-old Anthony Bland, who spent 4 years in a persistent vegetative state before a court made legal history by agreeing that it was in his best interest to withdraw his feeding tube. And let us not forget that it was just 2 years ago that the disaster claimed its 97th victim, 55-year-old Andrew Devine, who had lived with a serious brain injury for more than 3 decades. It has now been 34 years. To say that justice delayed is justice denied would be a significant understatement in this context. It is simply unendurable for any family to be made to wait this long for justice. I want to echo the words of the Secretary of State by paying tribute to Bishop James Jones, the many campaigners both inside and outside of this House who have worked for so long to establish the truth, and above all, to the bereaved families. They have gone beyond what anyone should have to endure to secure justice not only for their own loved ones, but for the victims of future disasters too. They are an inspiration to us all, and I think I speak for the whole House when I say that all of us here know what a debt we owe all of them. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to turn to the detail of the Secretary of State's remarks today. The purpose of the Government's response must be centred on the experience of the families, just as Bishop James's report itself was, to ensure that their suffering is remembered and, crucially, never to be repeated. And that is the commitment that the opposition too will make, that we will work to ensure the Government's proposals deliver meaningful justice. We welcome the commitment to consult on expanding legal aid for families bereaved through public disaster, but I must say that there is nothing in what we have seen from the Government to date to suggest that they will go as far as we believe is needed on requiring public authorities to act with candour and transparency. To the public, a duty on all public bodies to be forthcoming with the truth is a basic requirement if justice is to be done in the wake of terrible events that scar communities and change lives forever. Many will be shocked to hear that this does not already exist as a matter of law. The Hillsborough Law Now campaign, which as the Government knows includes bereaved families who are still fighting for accountability 34 years later, have said to us that without an effective duty of candour in place, the risk is that reform will simply add another layer of bureaucracy to what victims already have to endure. It is for this very reason that over a year ago, the Leader of the Opposition committed to a Hillsborough law, which would first and foremost impose a legal duty on public institutions, public servants and officials to act in the public interest and with transparency, candour and frankness when there has been a major incident. The Secretary of State knows that we have sought to amend his recent legislation to introduce this more effective duty of candour during its passage through Parliament, but that is an approach that the government has thus far rejected. Madam Deputy Speaker, we will continue our efforts in this regard because the government's requirement for a code of ethics is not enough. We do also welcome the commitment to a standing independent public advocate and have supported this change to the Victims and Prisoners Bill. But as the Secretary of State knows, we do also believe and have said to him repeatedly that the duty of candour is the vital missing piece to make effective the changes being made in respect of the independent public advocate. Madam Deputy Speaker, this issue is above party politics, but we do have a duty to say to the government that what they have announced does not yet go far enough. It must deliver on that vital promise that what happened in 1989 and has continued to happen to the families for 34 years will never happen again.
Yay. Lord Chancellor.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her response. Can I seek to address them in turn? So on the issue of legal aid, we absolutely accept that in this particular case there was manifest and completely unacceptable lack of equality of arms because it was being treated as an adversarial process in a way that is completely inimical to what the inquiry should have been designed to get to the bottom of. The culture was wrong in terms of how lawyers were approaching it. The equality of arms was non-existent. So we have sought to address that in two ways. First, in terms of ensuring that in appropriate cases where, frankly, it does become adversarial because people are defensive, because they have probably got something wrong, that it is necessary in those cases for the families to have the, frankly, the arms, if you like, the legal arms in order to take that on. That's why, if this had happened today, that funding would have been in place. And by the way, this isn't small amounts of funding. The total amount spent, quite properly, no complaints about this, in the second inquest was around £65 million. So this is a very significant change that has been made already. As I say, we are consulting on whether we should go further still. The issue about candour is, of course, critically important. Running like a message through a stick of rock through Bishop James Jones's report is the importance of changing the culture. So we across this House, and she rightly points out this is not, as it were, a party political issue, must be doing everything we possibly can to change that culture. And what I think is very important about the IPA is if one goes back to the point of learning one about the Charter itself, what Bishop James said was this. He said, I welcome the government's commitment to create an independent public advocate to act for bereaved families after the public disaster. And then he went on to say this. Once a public advocate has been appointed, I offer the Charter to them as a benchmark against which they may assess the way in which public bodies treat those bereaved by tragedy. And then he goes on to talk about the text of the Charter. So we hope that it will play a very, very important part in embedding that culture and holding people to account. But this job is not over. We continue to have the discussion, and I look forward to engaging with the Honourable Lady about it.
Theresa May. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Lord Chancellor for his statement and welcome the government's response, although, like him, I bemoan the fact that it has taken so long to respond to a report which not only did I commission when I was in office, but actually which reported when I was still in office. What underlay the approach, what underpinned the approach of the organs of the state at Hillsborough was a desire to protect themselves and their reputation, rather than serve the public they were there to protect, or indeed search for truth and justice, an attitude which occurred not just on that day, but has continued from those public authorities through the decades since. Can I therefore ask my right honourable friend if he agrees with me that in the Charter, almost the most important point is that it requires organisations to place the public interest above their own reputation? And what specific steps will government be taking to ensure that that culture is instilled across the whole of the public sector?
Thank you. Madam Deputy Speaker, as always, my right honourable friend absolutely gets to the heart of it. That is the critical and most important point. It's number 2 in the Charter to place the public interest above our own reputation. And she asks, well, those are words, how are those being woven into the culture? One powerful example is today we are announcing, it's not we, forgive me, the code of practice for ethical policing is being published. That contains, at page 7, under the chapter headed Ensuring Openness and Candour, paragraph 4.5, chief officers have a duty to ensure openness and candour within their force, which will include the following: implementing the Charter for families bereaved through public tragedy, Hillsborough Stadium disaster, lessons that must be learned. So it will be there at the point of training for officers and induction for civil servants. It is going to become part of the warp and weft of this country, part of the culture of what it means to be a civil servant in Britain.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As someone with great affection for the people of Liverpool and Merseyside, our thoughts are once again with the Hillsborough families today. And can I join the Shadow Front Bench in our qualified thanks in advance sight of this statement? I was pleased that the Lord Chancellor had thanked and congratulated honourable members of this House and Andy Burnham, Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham for their work in this area. So I have 3 questions for the Lord Chancellor. The Chief Executive of the College of Policing describes Hillsborough as a touchstone for change, but in the years since we've sadly seen a familiar culture of cover-up in relation to tragedies such as Grenfell and the infected blood scandal. So he does appear then to accept the principle, and just so he can clarify, he accepts the principle at some point the public will tire of hearing about promised cultural change without visible action accompanying it. The second question is, no police officer has been disciplined or convicted of any offence relating to the Hillsborough disaster. So does he agree that in cases where it's proven that false evidence was given or inaccurate statements were made, that retrospective action up to and including prosecution must take place?
Hear, hear.
And finally, part of the reason that the police were able to avoid full scrutiny around Hillsborough for so long was irresponsible reporting of the disaster by sections of the media. Is he convinced that reforms in that area have gone far enough, or does he agree with many of us that more reform in that area is sadly needed?
Hear, hear, hear.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for those very helpful and pertinent questions? Can I turn first of all to the issue of the police? Because yes, it is one thing setting the culture, which I think it's reasonable to point out is now going to be woven into police training, but accountability matters too. And so one of the things that matters is the Police Conduct Regulations of 2020, which of course post-date this report, include the following in Schedule 2. Police officers must be honest, act with integrity and not compromise or abuse their position, but also this. Police officers have a responsibility to give appropriate cooperation during investigations, inquiries and formal proceedings, participating openly and professionally in line with the expectations of a police officer when identified as a witness. Those are now on the face of the regulations. Breach of those provide a very powerful case, he may think, for dismissal or other suitable sanction. To the point he makes about retrospectivity, plainly, if evidence comes to light about facts, about behaviour at the time, then that can be considered in the normal way. I hope you will be encouraged to know that the offence of misconduct in a public office is being considered by the Law Commission with their usual and typical diligence, and we will be responding in the new year, because I think it's reasonable to observe that it has not operated as we might have liked. It is susceptible to reform, it seems to us, and we are giving that very active attention. To the point he makes about the media and irresponsible coverage, my goodness, he's got a point about that. I think there still needs to be a live conversation, frankly, about whether things have gone far enough.
Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The delay in this report has been unacceptable, but it's absolutely no fault of my right honourable and learned friend, the Lord Chancellor. And can I thank him for his statement, for the tone of his statement, which was characteristically generous-spirited and also full, and for the work he's done to expedite this report. Can I put these points to him? Would he agree with me that going forward it is important to pick up on some of the learning from the 2 Justice Committee reports, one on the coronial system and one on the pre-legislative scrutiny on the Victims Bill? Will he agree that to achieve the proper outcome as a legacy for the victims of Hillsborough, we should work to the position where it will be the norm that there will be proper legal representation for victims and bereaved families at inquests. That should be the norm rather than any form of exception. Secondly, that the duty of candour should extend in terms of legal representation by government departments to the fullest and earliest possible disclosure of all relevant materials that are in the hands of government departments and their lawyers. And thirdly, that we should work with the excellent current Chief Coroner, and his predecessor, of course, gave powerful evidence to our committee, to ensure that we can ensure greater consistency of standards and approach within the coronial system, which has not always been the case in the past. Would you agree that those are important matters, together with that assurance of equality of arms across the piece?
Very helpful point. So first of all, I would like to pay tribute to the work of the Justice Select Committee and the work that took place in respect of Coroner's Inquest. And indeed, in preparation for this statement, I went back and reread some of the evidence that was given by the then Chief Coroner, Mark Lucraft, when he was talking about this very important issue of equality of arms. Now, he made the point, from his position of Chief Coroner no less, that yes, there are cases, of course, where it's important to have legal representation. We've made enormous strides, as indicated. Equally, there will be those where sometimes it doesn't actually help terribly, and that's why we have to proceed with care on this. But the key issue is equality of arms, as he rightly points out. This business about candour as regards early disclosure is critical. And one of the important points that can sometimes be lost is, lest we forget, under Section 35 of the Inquiries Act, it is possible for someone to be held criminally liable on pain of a custodial sentence if they fail to act with candour in terms of producing information to an inquiry. That is an important sanction, it seems to me, and in appropriate circumstances, I hope the judges won't hesitate to use it.
Maria Eagle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Bishop James called his report the patronising disposition of unaccountable power. The key word is unaccountable. 34 years after 97 men, women and children were unlawfully killed in an event that was televised at the time, and that within 4 months the public inquiry into report had pinned the blame on the police. All that time later, no one has been held accountable for what happened at Hillsborough. Now nobody will be. So accountability here is key. And whilst culture change is good, we need legal change too. So therefore, I must say, it's inexplicable to me that there's a failure to legislate here for a full duty of candour for all public officials, to legislate to put the Charter for families bereaved by public tragedy into statute. And the Lord Chancellor knows that I still think that the independent public advocate's powers need to be beefed up to include an ability for him to compel transparency, be a data controller, so to torpedo attempts to cover up, which is what went wrong at Hillsborough. It was the cover-up as much as anything. So, will he reconsider his apparent unwillingness to legislate, to make it clear that this House and our nation requires accountability, requires candour, requires public authorities and those who work for them to act in the best interests of those bereaved in these appalling public tragedies that have occurred and will continue to occur?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady, and can I say, I hope entirely fairly, that the merits that are in this response, and I think it can reasonably be observed that there are a great number, are in considerable part due to the efforts that she has made engaging with me to make changes and improvements. On the issue of the IPA, for example, there is no doubt, and of course others have fed in as well, not least my right honourable friend, the former Prime Minister, that the IPA will be permanent. That wasn't the original proposal. It will be able to make reports of its own motion to come before this House, not just at the instigation of the state, and also will be able to make recommendations about what sort of inquiry should take place afterwards. It could be, as she knows, some sort of independent panel along the lines of the ones that were set up by Alan Johnson when he was Home Secretary, or indeed a statutory inquiry or non-statutory inquiry. So this IPA is of a different order of muscularity, if I can use that expression, than was originally envisaged, and she plays an important part in that. On the issue of the Hillsborough law, she and I have discussed this. There are countervailing considerations, as she knows, but of course the point is my door remains open, the conversation remains live. We will have a debate upon this, I hope, in the new year, and I look forward to discussing these matters further.
Jackie Doyle-Price.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend's statement goes some way to tackling the institutional behaviour which puts reputational damage and public confidence ahead of the interests of the people they are meant to serve. But the comments he's made are very much in the context of major public incidents. Yes. And I just wondered whether I could ask him how far he thinks that these expectations enshrined in the Charter can be applied to individual cases. And I speak particularly with reference to suicide, where quite often bereaved families attend inquests where the players are quite keen to avoid any suggestion of liability, but that can conflict with what he's described in terms of a duty of candour.
I am so grateful to my honourable friend for raising this critical point. It's not just about major disasters, important though they are. For the victims and the families where something dreadful has happened, they don't want to find themselves in a situation where it's unnecessarily adversarial, or indeed people are frankly just trying to save their own skin, showing institutional defensiveness. So a lot of this frankly comes down to this issue of culture. We are aware of that. So two things to say. First, in terms of the equality of arms, if it is a so-called ECF case, an exceptional case funding test, which is to do with Article 2, there are certain thresholds for that, then legal representation. But also this, on the issue of culture, we have provided this new document here, which includes principles guiding the government's approach when it holds interested person status at an inquest, which is about approaching the inquest with openness and honesty, including supporting the disclosure of all relevant and disclosable information to the coroner. In other words, the state shouldn't be in the position of being defensive, whether it's a major disaster or indeed it's relating to an individual. I hope that assists.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Lord Chancellor for this statement today and the empathy and decency shown on the subject of Hillsborough, and also thank him for the words what he said about football supporters not being to blame for Hillsborough. That means a lot to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's where my thank yous end. I, like many others, will feel let down today and feel as though this is a world away from the effective legislation we desperately need. I'm really, really worried that it will not prevent another Hillsborough-style state cover-up. Bishop James Jones called for the duty of candour on police officers, but the government's criminal justice bill mentions duty of candour at clause 73 only in the context of a code of conduct, and we talked about this morning. I feel though it's an insult to those affected by state cover-ups in the Memorandum in 1997. It does not establish the duty or define a duty in law. It provides no mechanism for compliance or, and also crucially, the government will not today introduce a statute duty of candour on all public officials, which is demanded by a Hillsborough law, now campaigners and thankfully supported by my own party. Secretary of State, without a legal duty of candour on all public servants hardwired into our justice system, we will see continued injustices from public officials who lie on the stand, act with impunity with no consequences. I had hoped today you would push back against the powerful vested interests who do not want to see this accountability in law, but sadly I feel as though they've won once again. Will the Secretary of State reflect on the comments from across this House today and work with us to ensure we get a true Hillsborough law that the 97 and everyone else who has suffered injustice at the hand of the state fully deserve?
Can I thank him for his words at the beginning? I've listened very carefully to what he said subsequently. He asked me if I will reflect. Of course I will reflect. I will listen very carefully to what's been said. We're here to respond, of course, to Bishop James's report, which wasn't principally about the points that have moved on since, which I know we all recognise. We want to change the culture. We remain committed to changing the culture, and I will continue to have that conversation about how we achieve that most effectively.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I must say I was just reflecting during the statement that the last time we were here in the Chamber talking about this, we were advised, I think it would be in the course of spring that the response would be produced. So it is welcome to have it here today, and also the general tone and nature of it. It wasn't just a lack of interest in finding the truth that was the issue here. It was the fact that actually organs of the state set out to smear people, to lie and to cover up and to save their own skin. And we can say this was 30 years ago, But we saw worrying a trend of that when we saw at the Stade de France, whilst not in our jurisdiction, an attempt to blame fans for a complete overreaction from the French law enforcement authorities to some incidents there. But what I found interesting is when he talked about the spend on legal representation, which we often saw a completely disproportionate spend. He says it would be proportionate. Who will determine that? Because let's remember, it was some of those bodies who thought it was perfectly proportionate for them to waste millions of pounds trying to save their own skins rather than to find justice.
So this is an excellent point. He asked who will determine it. The whole point about encouraging government departments to publish it is so that the public can make an assessment of whether it's proportionate or not. Frankly, that's an ordinary English word. People should know what it means, and if they don't, that will become clear.
George Howard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I too thank the Lord Chancellor for the statement today, which, as he conceded, is long overdue. I'd like to also pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Garston and Halewood, for the painstaking work she did to expose the evidence that existed but had never been taken into account. I'd also pay tribute to the Right Honourable lady, the member for Maidenhead, who recognised that there was an injustice that had to be put right and set up the process by which Bishop James was able to bring all of those lies and cover-ups to light. Madam Deputy Speaker, following the Hillsborough disaster, together with two constituents, Mr and Mrs Joines, who'd lost a son at Hillsborough, I attended part of the first inquest, and I was shocked by the extent to which that inquest was such a travesty, which seemed to be aimed at blaming the fans rather than the authorities for what happened. And one thing that came out of that for me, and I've said this before, is that there was a massive effort to stereotype football fans as being responsible for something they were actually victims of. And I do believe, and I welcome the fact that a public advocate is going to happen, but I do think, to be absolutely certain, that we need to put that role on the statute book.
To the honourable gentleman, and I thank him for the support that he's given to his constituents, I can confirm that the IPA is being put on the statute book.
Mary Robinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, for bringing this statement forward today. Hillsborough is synonymous with cover-up. Innocent victims were blamed for the failures of the police and the emergency services, and whistleblowers were pivotal in bringing a lot of the evidence forward. It's important that we have a duty of candour within the police service. I would say that right across public services, candour should be the golden thread that links them together. With the importance of whistleblowers being so important in this issue and in others, would my right honourable friend also look at the importance of perhaps having an office for the whistleblower, so that people know where to go if they want to raise an issue, and that we don't simply rely on the duty of candour, that people within organisations can also go somewhere to get help.
I thank my honourable friend for that typically thoughtful and helpful intervention. I think she makes an excellent point. Already within the Civil Service Code, there ought to be arrangements for people to do precisely that. But if we need to go further, let's discuss it. I'll be happy to have that conversation with her. Thank you.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wonder if I could explore with the Lord Chancellor what he said about Bishop James' recommendation about the pressing need for proper participation of bereaved families at inquests. The Joint Committee on Human Rights held an evidence session on a proposed Hillsborough law and strengthening human rights earlier this summer. We were particularly interested in the impact of the inequality of funding for legal representatives between the state and bereaved families at inquests and inquiries. And In evidence, witnesses argued strongly that there should be a proportionate equality of arms, distinguishing that from a mere parity of arms. And they saw the wider use of exceptional case funding for Article 2 cases as one way of achieving that. Does he agree with that evidence?
She makes an excellent point. So, of course, we think there should be equality of arms. The only point, sort of potential hesitation, is, as I say, I was reading the evidence of the Chief Coroner. What he said is that there are some cases where, although the state is represented and the state is an interested party, it's not necessarily the case where adding lawyers necessarily assists. As he put it, paragraph 97 of his written evidence, there are also arguments which could be advanced that simply adding more lawyers into the system would not necessarily uniformly help bereaved families in all cases. So in our view, it depends, it's on a case-by-case basis. There will be some cases, this is one, where it's manifestly necessary. There are others where there has to be a more judicious approach.
James Sunderland.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm privileged to be able to watch regular football in Bracknell, Reading and Aldershot. Following his statement today, is the Lord Chancellor content that sufficient legal and institutional protections are in place to help prevent another event like Hillsborough?
Well, I think, thank you for his question. I think most recognise that there have been very significant changes that have taken place, and I hope we can feel confident that something like this couldn't happen. But in the dreadful event that it were to, we just need to be sure that the resources are in place, the support is in place for families, so they don't have to suffer as they did those years ago.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Minister for the manner in which he opened his statement. But it's really not good enough that it has taken so long to get to this point. And in this House, I want to put on record my deep disappointment that we have waited this long for today. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think in getting the change that has been described, what is being proposed is also not good enough, because, as the Minister said in his statement, in the legal process, in order to achieve what we want, which, as the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead pointed out so correctly, is for public bodies to place the public interest, i.e. the citizens of our country, above the reputations of their own organisations. As he said, it's not just that who is represented, it's how lawyers engage in the inquest process, and indeed with the bereaved families. And it's about establishing not just an inquest, not just in inquiries, but day in, day out, this culture of candour that he talks about. It's about establishing that. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and he is, but I think that lawyers respond to the law. And that is at the heart of why we are so disappointed today not to have a Hillsborough law. I don't want a debate in January. I want a law. So can I ask him if he will meet with myself and other members of this House to discuss how we move forward from this point?
Well, my door is always open, and of course I will speak to the Honourable Lady and others. On the issue of law, it is important also to recognise that part of the statutory framework has moved on. So in respect of police, for example, I talked about the police conduct regulations of 2020. I recognise, as indeed Bishop James Jones did, that the key thing we want to do is to change the culture, but the law plays a part in that. There have been changes. Let's have some discussions in due course.
Derek Twigg.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't think we can repeat often enough, because sometimes I don't think it's understood, just what a web of deceit and lies was put forward by parts of the state, and particularly the police and others, over the years, and the complete effect it had on families who lost loved ones, and I was there on the day, in terrible, terrible circumstances. I don't think we forget how bad that's been. And even up to the second inquest, and I sat through a number of days of that second inquest, when lies were still being told during the inquest, when then video evidence was produced by the family's lawyers, to saying, well, there you are, you didn't do what you said. I mean, I was absolutely astounded that these people, all the years afterwards, will stick to these lies. So I come back to the point that I want to make, and I made earlier to the Justice Secretary, is that I really think that we can have a culture change, but what happened at that inquest and all the way up to it shows it is such an in-depth problem that it needs something stronger. And that's why, in terms of the duty of candour, it needs to have a legal basis, legislation for it. And I understand, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are some issues around whether it be national security or lawyers' confidentiality, but they could be got round. So he has given some indication he'll listen, so will he listen and change it to make sure there's actually a legal statutory duty?
Yeah. Can I thank the Honourable Gentleman who speaks with particular authority on these points? He talks about the second inquest, where people, as you say, were continuing to try to demonstrate the kind of institutional defensiveness. The thing that made a difference there, he may feel, was the fact that there were lawyers there to hold people to account in that kind of case. That's the equality of arms point. And it is important to recognise, I respectfully suggest that now we're in a situation where in this kind of case there will be lawyers to try to expose precisely that kind of defensiveness. So that is extremely important. I respect deeply the points that he makes. Of course we will have a conversation. He knows that there are countervailing issues which he adverts to briefly there. Of course I will have a discussion with him in due course.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are members of this House who were not born when Hillsborough happened, and those of us who were have had lives, careers, families. For the families of the victims to have waited that length of time for justice is intolerable, and then to have it compounded by not having the one thing which ensures you feel justice, that it cannot happen again. So does the Lord Chancellor agree with me that perhaps the only way those families will ever feel they've got justice is if we have a Hillsborough law to prevent it happening again?
The critical thing, of course, is we have to change the culture and ensure that people are held to account for their culture. There are important changes in these measures, as I hope the House will agree. As I said, I've indicated that I'm prepared to discuss with others what further steps are required.
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's taken 6 years to get to today's Hillsborough Charter, but like many, I ask why it's not a Hillsborough law. The delay for the families of the 97 has been completely unacceptable. So can I press him again on why the government have launched a consultation on improving legal aid for victims of public disasters? Why not simply legislate to do it?
Because we've taken very great steps already, and as I indicated, the sums involved are very significant, around 65 million for the second inquests in respect of this case alone. We are consulting on going further in respect of terrorism and cases where the IPA is appointed, but as no lesser authority than a former chief coroner has indicated, in this space one has to proceed with caution. We will go via a consultation and we will take sensible steps thereafter.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by paying tribute to the families and my city in the determination for justice and for James Jones's report. However, 6 years and 7 Home Secretaries later, it does not go far enough. We do need a duty of candour. So can the Lord Chancellor confirm and let us know that the families seeking justice from Grenfell and the Manchester Arena will get the support and the justice they deserve?
The Honourable Lady, she's absolutely right about there needing to be a duty of candour. Indeed, that is the single most important thing that comes out of the Hillsborough Charter, and it will be buttressed and supported and people held to account by an independent public advocate.
Dame Diana Johnson. Thank you, Madam Deputy
Speaker. In terms of the duty of candour that is set out in the Code of Practice for Ethical Policing, which has been published today, why is the duty of candour only on chief officers to ensure openness and candour? And why is it not on every individual officer?
Well, it is. So there are two aspects to it. Under the code, it's right that chief officers should have to be responsible for what is the culture and practice within their organisation. But there is also a further duty that exists on police officers through the 2020 regulations that I referred to earlier. And those can sound, of course, in disciplinary sanctions, including dismissal. So it's available for both.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Contaminated blood, Grenfell, Hillsborough, the one thing that they all have in common is that ordinary people suffer the incredible tragedy and then the authorities and the establishment circled the wagons to deny them justice. And what this report has exposed is a failure at the centre of the establishment to serve the public. And that this report is calling for candour in those people who represent those public bodies. So why is it that the government, after all this time, has come back here and said no to that one request?
Hopefully that's not quite a fair representation. Bishop James Jones, in his point of learning number 1, talked about the Hillsborough Charter, and if you look at paragraph 3 of that recommendation, he talks about candour. We've accepted that entirely. Bishop James Jones' report was not about the law, although he adverted to it. But as I've indicated, we are going to have further discussions. But it's important to notice what steps have been taken thus far.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. People, including those personally affected by the Hillsborough tragedy, will have listened to the government's response today and be deeply disappointed. What's needed, amongst other things, is a duty of candour right across all public organisations, but also private organisations that are public-facing, like those involved in social housing, for example. What's also needed is a real equality of arms, not just some legal aid for the bereaved, but full equality of arms, meaning the same spending for victims as for public bodies. But I just want to finish on this. The opposition supports a Hillsborough law. A Hillsborough law is necessary, as the families have called for, to deliver this. Since the opposition supports it, the government could have got this through and passed in a number of weeks. It still can. I urge the government, before the next general election, to work with the opposition across the House to get this passed. It's what the bereaved families in those communities deserve, and it's what people going forward deserve as well.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his observations, which I've listened to with care. On the issue of equality of arms, it has to be observed, I hope, that the changes that have been made are extremely significant, not least because there is a commitment to ensure that there is proportionality, so we can no longer go back to a situation where the state is using apparently its deep pockets to unfairly load the dice against victims. That is being changed, and that is a direction of travel we are very committed to.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I listened very carefully to the very considered Lord Chancellor's statement, and a question comes to mind is why not? Why not the Hillsborough law? It's not been answered.
This has, of course, been considered very, very carefully across government departments, and there are countervailing interests, which I'm very happy to discuss with him. I mean, there are issues to concern. If you look at how the bill was initially drafted by Andy Burnham, it's a very low bar in terms of there's a lot of complexity to it. I'm very happy to discuss it with him. But the central point I want to get across today is that what Bishop James Jones was talking about is changing the culture. As he himself noted, legislation is not always the answer. Changing the culture is critically important. And through this charter, with the IPA, we will make enormous strides to ensuring this is part of what it means to be a public service in Britain.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Lord Chancellor for his statement and commend the honourable member from this side of the chamber who have doggedly fought this the whole way through. At the heart of any announcement in terms of Hillsborough should be the victims and their families who are left behind and devastated by the lack of urgency that they see taken by government. Does the Lord Chancellor agree that at the crux of any legislation for a public disaster, the onus should be for the victims and their families? And will the Lord Chancellor ensure that the correct provisions are in place to finally compensate those who still today live with this tragic event each and every minute of each and every day?
Well, he makes a powerful point. For the victims, the pain never ends, and grief is a journey, as Bishop James Jones reported. But what is totally unacceptable is a situation where victims are left floundering in the agony of their grief in the immediate aftermath of a tragedy. That's why we've set up the IPA. That's why the IPA will be permanent, ready to swing into action to ensure not just that they can provide assistance and support and information, but also hold the relevant agencies to account.
Now.
I've listened very carefully
to what the Lord Chancellor says, and I'd like to thank him for his measured and comprehensive and frank approach to this one. I think the primary question that would be asked today, what he has said today, does he genuinely believe that the families of the bereaved and those affected by this would be satisfied with what he said today?
This statement is intended to respond to the 25 points of learning in Bishop James Jones's report. Now, of course, because of the delay, which I've been pretty candid about, it's been too long, there has been a development in thinking thereafter. But in terms of the points that were made in the report, the 25 points of learning, in terms of the 3 ones that were identified by Bishop James Jones, the Charter, the Hillsborough Charter, the equality of arms, the duty of police candour, those have been fulfilled. And they've been fulfilled, I think, in a way which massively advances the state of our country. Of course, people want to have further discussions. I respect that and will, of course, accommodate them. But it's important to note also, in terms of what was requested, very significant changes have been made.
I thank the Lord Chancellor for his statement, and we now move on to a statement. I'll just wait for the removal company. Statement, Secretary of State Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is this government's policy that the UK does not recognise self-identification for the purpose of obtaining a gender recognition certificate. However, this government is determined that everyone should be able to live their lives free from unfair discrimination. We are proud to have passed the Same-Sex Marriage Act and Turing's Law. We also introduced a modernised and affordable gender recognition process while recognising the need to maintain checks and balances. Today, we are laying an order to update the list of approved overseas countries and territories for parliamentary approval. This is provided for under Section 11B of the Gender Recognition Act and follows previous periodic updates. This is long overdue. The list of approved overseas countries and territories was last updated in 2011. A commitment was made to keep the list under review. So this is a further step in implementing our response to the Gender Recognition Act 2004 consultation. We are doing this because there are some countries and territories on the list who have made changes to their systems and would not now be considered to have similarly rigorous systems as the UK. Inadvertently allowing self-ID for obtaining GRCs is not government policy. It should not be possible for a person who does not satisfy the criteria for UK legal gender recognition to use the overseas routes to do so. We also need to ensure parity with UK applicants. It would not be fair for the overseas routes to be based on less rigorous evidential requirements. This would damage the integrity and credibility of the process in the Gender Recognition Act. We have finalised details of overseas countries and territories to be removed and added to the list laid today via an affirmative statutory instrument. We have undertaken thorough checks in collaboration with the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office to verify our understanding of each overseas system in question, to then measure it against the UK standard route to obtain gender recognition. My officials and I have formally engaged with colleagues and ministers from devolved governments in advance of laying this statutory instrument. The government is committed to ensuring that this outcome of the Gender Recognition Act consultation from 2020 is followed through and upheld, and the overseas list will be updated via statutory instrument more regularly in future. This work is important because of the complex interactions between the Gender Recognition Act and the Equality Act. The complexity of the legal situation has been reinforced by the judgment in December 2022 by Lady Justice Haldane in the judicial review brought by 4 Women Scotland, upheld on appeal last month by the Inner House of the Court of Session, which effectively stated a gender recognition certificate changes a person's sex for the purposes of the protections conferred by the Equality Act. Labour's 2004 Gender Recognition Act and 2010 Equality Act did not envisage that the words sex and gender would be used as differently as they are today. This is having an impact on all policy that draws on these acts, including tackling conversion practices and guidance for gender questioning children. To that end, I'm exploring how we can rectify these issues across the board and provide legal certainty. This will reduce the tensions that have emerged as a result of the confusion around the terms sex and gender. First, by ensuring that we are evidence-led in the approach we take. For example, when considering appropriate treatment of children on the NHS, we should be fully informed by the final report from the CAS review, which is due early next year. Given the complexity of this area, the review is understandably taking longer than originally expected. Second, by ensuring consistency in how we implement policy across the board. And third, exploring if we need more clarity in law. For example, the Equality and Human Rights Commission has recommended that we clarify the definition of sex in the Equality Act, while ensuring that any further legislation that is proposed fully takes into account the complexity of issues. We should not leave ordinary people to suffer unintended consequences because we in Parliament are shy of dealing with difficult issues. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Annalisa Dodds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to thank the Minister for Women and Equalities for advance sight of her statement. I welcome this chance to respond to the Minister on these important issues. Such opportunities are vanishingly rare, given this is the first oral statement I believe she's made on the Women and Equalities brief this year. Like Santa Claus, it seems she gets to work when Christmas is around the corner. Indeed, I started this morning by joining a debate on the government's continued failure to ban conversion practices, a promise that was made over half a decade ago. I was sorry to not see the Minister there to explain that failure in person. No conversion practices ban, no commitment to making every strand of hate crime an aggravated offence, to tackle the staggering rise in violent hate crime that's targeting LGBT+ people, and no provision to schools of the guidance that has been promised repeatedly but not delivered. She's been unable to deliver in any of those areas, and today she even tried in a statement to say that legislation passed over 13 years ago has caused these delays. You couldn't make it up. Let's be clear. There are millions of British LGBT+ people in this country, and I would love to hear from the Right Honourable Lady what she's doing for them after her government ditched its LGBT action plan, disbanded its LGBT advisory panel and frittered away taxpayers' money on a cancelled international conference that LGBT+ organisations refused to attend. Now, of course it's important that the list of approved countries is kept up to date. That was what Labour provided for when we passed the GRA back in 2004. The list was last amended in 2011, when 2 countries were removed from it and 9 added. At that time, the government said, and I quote, "It expects it will be necessary to update this list within the next 5 years." Here we are 12 years later, and the Minister's just got around to it, the kind of timescale that our country's grown used to when it comes to Conservative delivery. Indeed, even she herself said it's long overdue. Now, the Right Honourable Lady has outlined several changes today, and it's important we understand fully why these decisions have been made. Why is there so little information provided here on why these decisions have been taken? As just one example, as I understand it, Germany approved self-ID this summer, but it's still on the list. Is that because their changes apply to birth certificates rather than to having GRCs, because they don't have such a certificate? Or is it because of the timing of their reforms? There's no clarity here. There's no information. We're talking here about likely very small numbers of people, but for those individuals, getting this right is important, and it's extremely difficult to determine the Department's approach on the basis of an extremely thin explanation. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, many people living in this country who hold GRCs from the overseas route will be worried about what this means for them. Can the Minister be clear? Do these changes impact in any way on their rights? And what about those with applications which are still outstanding? Also, as a result of these changes, many countries which are close allies of the UK have been removed from the list. Can the Minister explain whether she's had bilateral discussions with each of them over the implications of this move? She referred to thorough checks, but not to any bilateral engagement. Does that mean that none took place? And if so, why was there no such engagement on an issue which I would suspect we as the UK would expect to be consulted were the shoe on the other foot? On that note, what assessment has she made of the impact of this on the mutual recognition of UK GRCs in other countries? Did she consult her newly appointed colleague in the other place, the Foreign Secretary, about the diplomatic impact of these changes? If so, does he agree with them? I note, for example, that China is now on the approved list, but not our 4 closest Five Eyes allies. She also mentioned that there was consultation with the Scottish and Northern Irish authorities, but she didn't say what the upshot of this was. She also did not indicate what the impact of this is on our arrangements with Ireland either. Please can she clarify this? And finally, changes to the rights of foreign nationals in this country may lead to wider concerns about the mutual recognition of marriage rights and other rights such as adoption. Will the Minister also clarify whether the Government has any plans in these areas as well? Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me be clear. Labour wants to modernise the Gender Recognition Act while making sure that does not override the single-sex exemptions in the Equality Act. And we recognise that sex and gender are different, as the Equality Act does. But I'm afraid the Minister's speech today only underlines how chaotic her government's approach has become, with the Conservatives apparently completely divided on these issues and focused on rhetoric rather than delivery. LGBT+ people deserve better.
Secretary of State. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think it's extraordinary that the Honourable Lady would say that the Conservatives are divided on this issue. I would ask her whether the member for Canterbury agrees with her and the disgraceful way that she has been treated by members of the Labour Party, I think, shows that we beg to differ. We are united on this side of the House. They are not. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady has asked quite a number of questions, and I will take the time to go through them in sequence. First of all, she complains that this is the first time that she's hearing me give a statement on this. The fact of the matter is, I'm in this House for oral statements, and there's plenty of opportunity to question. The Minister for Equalities is also in Westminster Hall. But one of the things I'm very keen to do is to stop the Labour Party from using this issue as a political football. They have messed this. They laugh, Mr. Speaker. They laugh, Madam Deputy Speaker. But it was Labour Party MPs who stood on a platform during the debacle over Section 35 with an attempted murderer on stage complaining about this government. So I refuse to countenance any criticism for them. They have messed around so much on this issue. The Honourable Lady claims that Labour has a policy on gender recognition. It is the policy we announced 3 years ago, hollow, empty, repetitive, and has shown that they have done absolutely no work whatsoever on this issue. So let's take her questions. In turn. She asks, why is it that countries like Germany have been removed from the list? And
it's not possible to intervene. She's answering the statement. Secretary of State.
Thank you. Well, that's certainly fine. So she's questioning why certain countries are on the list and others are not on the list. And I heard, again, lots of laughter from members on the backbenches. I'm going to have to reinforce this really important point. This is not a tool for foreign policy. This is not a tool for foreign policy. This is a tool that is used to make sure that other countries' systems are as rigorous as ours. I understand why people will have concerns, but this is not about virtue signalling which countries we like or which countries we don't like. Far from it. This is about whether another country's system meets our guidelines. So she talks about countries like China. It's a very, very good question, and I will explain to her why some countries, which we might not expect, are on the list. I will use the example of Kazakhstan, where to obtain gender recognition, applicants must undergo gender reassignment surgery. This includes forced sterilisation, something which we condemn completely. It is banned in our country and is a form of conversion practice. Recognising certification for someone who has undergone that is a compassionate acknowledgement of what some transgender people in other countries have had to go through to obtain their certification. Are we really going to send people with GRCs from China or Kazakhstan who've been forcibly sterilised by their state that we don't think they're serious about legally changing their gender? Of course not. So that is why we have included certain countries, because if people have gone through such extreme measures for gender recognition, we should not be giving them any additional issues here. For other countries who we work very closely with, we did carry out quite a lot of extended engagement. I'm also the Secretary of State for Business and International Trade. I work with embassies across the world. I work with ministers across the world. I did speak to other country ministers about this. They recognise the sovereignty of the UK. Ambassadors have been notified. We did this with a lot of collaboration with the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office throughout this process, and we are monitoring the international reaction to this legislation. So please be assured that diplomatic posts have been notified of the changes we have provided them with comprehensive question and answer documents that address any potential misconceptions of what this statutory instrument does. But it goes back to the point I was making about why I am very, very careful with the interventions that I make on equalities. Because Labour do not do their homework. They stand up here with repetitive lines off social media. They think that this is an issue which they can use LGBT people as a shield for silly policy. We are going to do the policy properly. We're taking a lot of time to do this right. The Minister for Equalities and I are keen to ensure that LGBT people across the UK understand that this government is looking after them and making sure that we are doing things in a way that will not collapse once it makes contact with reality.
Elizabeth Truss.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I congratulate my right honourable friend on her statement, and also agree with her that there does need to be more clarification in the law around sex and gender. That is why later this afternoon I will be presenting a private member's bill to do just that. First of all, it will be clear that single-sex spaces and sex, as defined in the Equality Act, is on the basis of biological sex. And secondly, what it will do is protect the under-18s from undergoing hormone treatment for gender dysphoria. It will also make sure that the state doesn't formally recognise social transitioning for the under-18s. Given what my right honourable friend has said, will the government back my bill?
I thank my right honourable friend for her question, and I certainly support any effort to clarify the law, and we should start from first principles. No child is born in the wrong body, and no child should be put on a pathway towards irreversible medical transition. I am also conscious that it will take time to amend law, and therefore I'm focused on what is going to work for now. And that is why we are publishing guidance to give clarity to schools as soon as possible. But I must say, I do remember discussing this growing problem of what we describe as social transitioning with my right honourable friend when she was Minister for Women and Equalities. And I'm keen that she has come to my point of view. I'm very keen to work with her on this to see how we can make sure that this works properly in practice.
SNP spokesperson Kirsten Oswald.
Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Lady for advanced sight of her statement, although I would have welcomed a good deal more detail. I do have to say, whether it is the UK Government being missing in action on its own commitments to ban conversion therapy 5 years on, or now this, they do seem much more interested in culture wars than in looking after the rights of some of the most vulnerable. And of course, this is the same UK Government intent on blocking the democratic will, the cross-party expressed democratic will of the Scottish Parliament, again more interested in constitutional shenanigans than human rights. I wonder if she can tell me, she talked about unintended consequences. Has she undertaken an impact assessment of how this change will affect the safety, the health and the well-being of those affected? Can she say what conversations specifically she has had with international counterparts, and what specific evidence she received ahead of this change that made her decide to remove these named territories? Can she outline exactly what will happen to those already living here and living under their new gender who come from the places she's now removing from the list? And can she say where this now leaves the notion of reciprocal arrangements? What of those from the UK living elsewhere? Does she recognise that the UK is travelling rapidly backwards on the rights of LGBT people, and that this decision is very much out of step with other progressive countries around the world? What consideration has she given to the UK's international reputation? From sending vulnerable refugees to Rwanda, from placing barriers in front of care workers who want to come into the UK, and now this, the dearth of compassion at the heart of the UK government is writ large. And of course, we've all heard the reports that the Conservative Party intends to fight the general election on the trans debate and culture wars. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, nobody's identity should be in question. As she herself said, nobody's identity should be used as a political football. We need to stop that. She needs to reflect and she needs to change tack.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I completely disagree with the Honourable Lady. She talks about us using this issue as culture wars football, yet the Labour opposition say this is the first time they've heard us say anything about it in the House. Surely both cannot be true. I think it is extraordinary. I think it is extraordinary that she is telling us that we are not compassionate. It is her government in Scotland that was allowing rapists to be housed in women's prisons while using self-ID as a cover. So I will not accept that. We are the ones who are thinking about women's rights. We are the ones who are thinking about safeguarding. We are the ones who are thinking about vulnerability. She asks me about reciprocal arrangements. The fact is that our system is a lot more rigorous, so there is no reason for others to stop accepting our certificates because they have not changed. It is because other countries have changed their process that we are updating this. We cannot be in a situation where we have rules for people in this country and we allow people from other countries with different rules to be able to access things that people in the UK cannot access. This is about equality before the law. This is about parity. So reciprocal arrangements will be fine. She asks about people already living here. This is not retrospective legislation, so it's not going to impact people who are already here. We're just making it clear. Self-ID is not something that this government supports. We do not believe that this is something that people should just declare because it creates the very same problems which she saw in Scotland at the Isla Bryson case of rapists going into women's prisons. We are not going to allow that to happen on this government's watch.
Jackie Doyle-Price.
Madam Deputy Speaker, of course you cannot change biological sex, and the GRC establishes legal sex for the purpose of exercising certain rights. Now, given that we've had a massive shift in rights since the Act was passed in 2004, particularly same-sex marriage, could my right honourable friend advise me exactly what additional rights are granted through the giving of a GRC?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. This is one of the areas where we're trying to provide clarity. Because of the Haldane judgment, there is now confusion between biological sex and legal sex, and certainly in terms of the interpretation which people put on it. So a gender recognition certificate certainly had different standards in terms of what you could obtain until this judgment. We want to make clear, for instance, that single-sex spaces are still going to be protected. We're going to be doing a lot more in order to clarify that. The Haldane judgment changes that. And that is one of the reasons why we need to look very carefully. There were 30 pages in the report, in the appeal court report, shows how complex this issue is. The law is no longer clear. In fact, I would go so far as to say the law is now a mess because of changing times. We need to provide clarity. We cannot assume that the wording as was intended in 2004 or 2010 still works in 2023. And we are carrying out work in order to fix that.
Just to confirm, I will only be taking those who were here at the start of the statement. They will know if they weren't, so I expect that they won't stand. Sir Ben Bradshaw.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, not wishing to be upstaged by the ex-Home Secretary, the Minister whose job it is to defend vulnerable minorities chooses to make her first statement this year in this House to announce 2 measures attacking transgender people. Why does she think that the UK, which was first for 4 years up until 2015 in the European League of LGBT rights, has now fallen to 17th under her watch?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I completely reject the honourable gentleman's assertion. I have come to the floor of the House for an SI, which is actually unusual for a Secretary of State, because I think it is important that members across the House have an opportunity to ask questions. I am not afraid of anybody on the opposite benches. I'm not afraid of a single. I'm not afraid of a single one of them, because I know that they do not take this seriously. The honourable gentleman asks why, or the right honourable gentleman, I should say, asks why is it that we have fallen? It is because self-ID is something that we differ with in opinion with other countries. It's a fact. We are different, but just because other countries believe that self-ID is the way doesn't mean that we in the UK have to do what everybody else is doing.
Ian O'Brien.
The issues of gender recognition and self-ID that my right honourable friend is working to clarify are increasingly an issue in amateur and professional sport, where the risk of serious injury to women and girls, and also examples of unfairness. Does my right honourable friend agree that in general for most sports it is safer and fairer to separate on the basis of biological sex?
I do agree. Certainly in the majority of physical sports, it is fairer and safer to separate on the basis of biological sex. And it is crucial that sporting bodies understand their responsibilities to women. A poor understanding of equalities law has it's led to women like the pool player Lynn Pinchers having to take legal action to ensure fair competition in their sport. Girls often fear being physically injured by biological males and enduring rather than speaking up about the abuse because they are scared of being called bigots. And this is what I would say to people across the House, that calling people transphobic and calling them bigots when they express concerns is creating a chilling effect. I had a group of school children, teenage girls, who I had in my office who told me about how because of mixed-sex sports, they are bullied and pushed around, that one of them talked about her glasses being broken because the boys are using the opportunity to bully. We should think about children. We should think about protecting them. So I disagree with the labelling of anybody who has a different opinion as transphobic. That is what is causing the problems in this debate, and I am determined to bring some light rather than the heat which they continue to generate.
Christine Jardine.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I just say that I actually agree with the Secretary of State. Labels of any sort of people in any part of this debate are unacceptable, and we shouldn't indulge it. The Secretary of State also said that this is an important decision. I agree with that also. It's an important statement. She also said it had to be evidence-based. I completely agree with that. So could she perhaps tell us which organisations in this country concerned with LGBT rights and with human rights generally she consulted in this statement, and what their response and recommendations were?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. She is right. We did carry out extensive consultations, but remember, this is something which we do repeatedly and periodically. The fact that we have not carried this out since 2011 shows that we have been remiss in our duties, and that is something that I am fixing. And one of the issues that we have is that a lot of people do not understand the law where it comes to self-identification. We are providing clarity there. We have engaged with numerous LGBT groups, but the fact of the matter is that many of them support self-ID. That is not this government's policy. Stonewall does not decide the law in this country. Whatever it is that people want to campaign on, we will listen and we will hear. But we have been very clear about this. We have been very clear about this. And this is something that we are not budging on, and we are updating the law in accordance with government policy, and we will continue to do so.
Miriam Cates.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement, which provides some much-needed clarity, because self-ID does threaten the dignity and the safety of women and girls, and she's absolutely right that the UK should not recognise GRCs from countries that operate policies of self-ID. Yeah. Sex matters in life and in law, and it's right that the UK has our own rigorous processes to gain GRCs, but these safeguards don't apply to the process of changing sex markers on passports and driving licences, which are of course far more commonly used for identification in everyday life. So will my right honourable friend look again at the Passport Office's 2021 review and decide whether or not we can stop this self-ID by the back door through driving licences and passports?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and it is a good one. It is one of the things that came to light as we looked at government policy across the board, and it is an example of how the law needs updating. The reason why we have that is not because the government supported self-ID, but it was because before the same-sex marriage law came into being, we wanted people to be able to change their legal documents so that they could get married. Now that we have a law that has fixed that. We should look again at some of the measures which we brought into place earlier on, which are no longer needed. And that is one of the reasons why I think she's right to raise that. It is a Home Office issue, but I will raise it with the Home Secretary and see what it is we can do to repair.
Sir Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will say this as gently as I can. I feel today, as a gay man, less safe than I did 3 years or 5 years ago. Why? Sometimes because of the rhetoric that is used, including by herself, in the public debate. I'm afraid we're not able to have a debate. Let's have a debate. I'll be very happy to debate. I'm just making that point, that many of us feel less safe today, and when people over there cheer, as they just did, it chills me to the bone. It genuinely does. So I ask her two very simple questions. First of all, how many people does she think today's decision will affect? Precise number. And secondly, she will know that there are lots of people in the UK who have entered into same-sex civil partnerships and marriages who would like those to be recognised in other countries around the world so that they can live their lives wherever that may be. What has she done since she's been in power to make sure that more countries recognise those same-sex civil partnerships and marriages?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I will also speak very gently to the honourable gentleman. He says that my rhetoric chills him to the bone. I would be really keen to hear exactly what it is I have said in this statement or previously that is so chilling. But I would tell him what chilled me. In May 2021, against official advice, I will stress that officials said you should not have this meeting. I met a young lady called Kira Bell. She was a lesbian. She was a lesbian who told me the horrific experience that she had in the Tavistock clinic. It was an eye-opening experience. I know that the member for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath talked about transing away the gay in his speech in Westminster Hall debate. We are seeing, I would say, almost an epidemic of young gay children being told that they are trans and being put on a medical pathway for irreversible decisions, and they are regretting it. That is what I'm doing for young LGBT children. I am making sure that young people do not find themselves sterilized because they are being exploited by people who do not understand what these issues are. And I am saying this on the advice of clinicians, I'm saying this on the advice of academics. There are clinicians from the Tavistock who have been whistleblowing, talking about what these issues are. The honourable man tells me that he is traumatized. We are traumatized by what is happening to young children, and we are not going to run away from this issue any longer.
Ronald Trawadina.
Speaker, like millions of people across this country, including the LGB Alliance, I'm concerned by the erosion of hard-won rights of women and girls, not least the right to female-only spaces. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that we need a coherent policy across the whole of government, across every single department, to make sure that we are protecting female-only spaces and making that as a core commitment ahead of the next election?
I do agree, and I do agree that this has to be across the board in government, and some of this work is actually already underway. But I think it goes far beyond that. This cannot be a left or right issue. This cannot be an issue where certain people are personally invested in their own campaigns and cannot see the other point of view. This needs to be something that we work together on both sides of the House. But if I am giving a technical statement and explaining our thinking, and members across the House are talking about how they're traumatized, this is not serious policy making. We need to be able to have a proper conversation, take the heat out of the debate, and speak properly as members of Parliament representing all of our constituents.
Neil Hanvey.
Speaker, it really infuriates me to hear people in this chamber speak about the LGBT community as one homogenous group. We are not one homogenous group, and there are many LGBT anti-people who oppose self-ID for obvious reasons. One of the issues that I'm deeply concerned about is that many public bodies have not been observing their public sector equality duty properly, and in some cases they have been erasing sex from legislation which is outweighed with that duty, what action can be taken to make sure that legislation is fit for purpose and it matches all of the protected characteristics contained in the Equality Act?
The Honourable Gentleman is quite right to raise this issue. This is why I mentioned the work we are doing around clarifying the difference between sex and gender. As I said, these terms were used interchangeably when we originally legislated in this House, and that is creating some confusion in terms of understanding. But public authorities should aim for clarity in what they are doing. I know that many organisations, hospitals in particular, think that removing the term women is more inclusive. It really isn't. It is excluding. And I would say to them gently that if you are using phrases like chest feeding or removing words like mother from paperwork, from forms, you are not helping. You are actually making things worse, and you are providing more. You're providing confusion. And I'm going to be working with public authorities. The Minister for Women is also a health minister. We take this issue very seriously, and we will see what more we can do in order to provide clarity. Providing clarity is the key point.
Okay. Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, women's participation in sport is significantly lower than men. And we need to encourage more girls and women to participate in sport because it's good for their long-term health as well as their mental well-being. But we do hear stories, and I've heard stories in my constituencies, of women and girls being put off sport by the presence of males for safety, privacy or fairness reasons. Can I ask the Secretary of State what she is doing to encourage girls to participate in sport and to protect the integrity, fairness and privacy within women's sport?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is something which I have said it's crucial sporting bodies understand. They are responsible for managing the rules in this space, and quite a lot of them have actually updated their guidance in order to reflect this, but not all of them. But young women in competitive sports shouldn't have to just silently accept that biological men will always beat them and take their chances to win gold. Generations of women before them have worked really hard to ensure that women have a place in sports, and those who excel get the reward for that and are recognised. So the Equality Act is not a barrier to fair sport for women. It permits it, and it even requires it. So I'll be working with my colleagues in DCMS. The Minister for Equality is also a DCMS minister, to ensure that fair sport is a right every woman and every girl can enjoy.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Secretary of State's commitment to evidence-based policy making and awaiting the outcome of the CAS review. She will be aware, like me, that the interim report of the CAS review stated that they'd heard from young lesbians who felt pressurised to identify as transgender male, and that's something that, as a lesbian, concerns me. But as well as evidence-based policy making, does she also think it's very important to be clear about what are and are not our obligations under international law? And does she agree with me that there's no international treaty to which the United Kingdom is a signatory which requires us to have a system of self-identification? The current system we have is legally compliant and is compliant with the ECHR. And while some people talk about self-ID as best practice, that is no more than an expression of their opinion. And does she also recognise that self-identification raises very real issues, not just for the safety of women and girls, but also for their privacy and dignity, and also for the rights of same-sex attracted people to freely associate?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my learned friend is absolutely right. Self-ID is something that impacts all of the things she's mentioned. I think we actually speak less about freedom of association and the impact that it has there. And it goes to the point made by the Honourable Member for Kirkcaldy, that we do need, in many respects, to separate sexual orientation from what we refer to now as gender identity, what is under the T. We have lumped them together before. That was helpful in many circumstances, but I've seen this issue arise in some of the other equalities work I've been doing around race, where we use the term BAME to lump lots of different groups of people together. And when that occurred, we actually missed a lot of information about what was happening within those groups. We need as much granularity as possible if we are going to serve both people who are LGB and people who are T. She talks about what work we're doing in order to stop lesbians from being made to feel like they have to be trans-identified males. I've asked the Equality Hub to do some work with the Lesbian Project, who I know are very interested in fixing this problem. But on the point of international treaties, she is absolutely right. And so much of the criticism about how we will fall in international standing is not evidence-based policy. It is not a good lookism. This is not a good look, and we probably shouldn't do it. That is not how we should be making policy. We should be looking at the facts, thinking very clearly about the outcomes we want, and acting accordingly. And that is the way the Equality Hub, under my leadership, will continue to behave.
Nick Fletcher.
Speaker, the Secretary of State for Education said that today that to completely stop children from being able to socially transition at school will require change in equality law. Yet children who do socially transition can end up on a pathway to puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones and surgeries that leave them infertile, and which impact their bone and even their brain development. It's also tearing families apart up and down this country, and we cannot continue to let this happen within our schools. So I will be supporting my right honourable friend's bill this afternoon before she lays it in Parliament. But will my Secretary of State also meet with concerned colleagues across this House to change this law to protect our children at school, because this is a must?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. I should say I'm very happy to meet with members across the House on this issue, but I will stress that changing the law is not going to be easy. It is not going to be straightforward. It will need consensus broadly from across the House because of many of the issues which I have alluded to earlier. But to his earlier point around social transitioning, I think he's actually right. And it's probably worth me putting on the record what social transitioning is, because I know a lot of people may not necessarily be clear about what I'm referring to. Social transitioning is a relatively new phenomenon. It is rooted in gender identity theory, which I must stress is a very contested ideology. The term is often used to refer to a range of actions that a child may take to appear more like the opposite sex, accompanied by an expectation that they will be treated as if they are. This may include requests for a child to change their name, pronouns associated with them, uniform, or use different facilities from those provided for their biological sex. Not all of these requests will comply with legal duties on schools, in particular to safeguard children. Social transitioning is not a neutral act, as it has been recognised that it can have formative effects on a child's future development, which is what he's alluding to when he's talking about cross-sex hormones. We are taking this very seriously. We will have the gender questioning guidance out very shortly, and I hope it will address many of the issues which he is concerned about.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I commend the Minister for her wisdom in her answers to all the questions here this morning. Will the Minister confirm that, similar to the fact that at 16 years old you can have a full driving licence in the United States of America, and yet you would not be able to apply for a full licence in the United Kingdom until our legal age is attained, and that this is the same premise in operation, and that our laws supersede other nations in this sovereign matter? In other words, decisions are made here by our Minister and our government.
And not Stonewall.
Yes. I do think that we need to make sure that there is clarity across the board, that it is ministers in this country who are making those decisions very clearly and being held to account in Parliament as well. There are a lot of loopholes, I think, that have become apparent that allow people to change things through different means than via Parliament. Some of that is in changing the colloquial meaning of actually quite a lot of expressions. So bringing as much as possible into law to provide clarity, I think, will be really important.
Sir Conor Burns.
Could I invite my right honourable friend to agree with me that despite some of the rhetoric we've heard in the House today, the United Kingdom is an immeasurably better place to grow up as a gay person than it was in decades gone by, and that this House is at its best when it can find moderate consensus on what is right for our citizens. In that light, can I ask my right honourable friend if it is still the government's intention to bring forward conversion therapy ban legislation to this House? And if it is the case that the government intends to do that, will she give me and through me the House and the country an assurance
that we will put often confused, vulnerable and frightened young people at the very heart of that, and that evidence-based decisions will inform the legislation the government brings forward?
I'm very, very happy to confirm that. And can I please thank my right honourable friend for the very measured tone in which he asked his question. It is a model, I think, for members on the other side of the House. There is so much that we have done, even under this specific government, even under my watch. A lot of the work that we've been doing around our HIV action plan, around trans healthcare. We've established 5 new community-based clinics for adults in the country. There is a lot that we are doing, so it is wrong to characterise us as not caring about LGBT people. It also sends the wrong signal to our international partners. If they feel that we are not doing well, it is not because of what we're doing, it is what members across the House are saying. But Madam Deputy Speaker, if I may, the right honourable gentleman asked a question about conversion practices. Can I just give a little bit more clarity about what it is we are doing? This is a longer answer than normal, but I know that this is a matter of deep interest across this House, so I would like to address my thinking fully. A commitment was given to publish a draft conversion practices bill for pre-legislative scrutiny. I am determined to meet this promise, as I know is the Minister for Equalities. Attempts at so-called conversion therapy are abhorrent and are largely already illegal. So what a bill would do is identify this as a particular threat to gay people and confirm the illegality of harmful processes intended to change someone's sexuality. In that time, since this bill was first promised, this issue has developed. Now, the threat to many young gay people is not conversion relating to their sexuality, but conversion relating to gender identity. Girls like Kira Bell, who were rushed onto puberty blockers by the NHS and had a double mastectomy, now regret the irreversible damage done to them. I believe that this is a new form of conversion therapy. Respected clinicians, like those who left Tavistock, have made clear they are fearful of giving honest clinical advice to a child, because if they do not automatically affirm and medicalise a child's new gender, they will be labelled transphobic. So whatever bill we do needs to address many of those issues, and that is why we are going to publish a draft bill.
Stephen Doughty.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a shame that the Secretary of State isn't making a full statement on the issue of conversion therapy, because it's indeed a concern of many members on the opposite side, and we'd like some actual facts, which she hadn't provided up until now. She also hasn't provided, Madam Deputy Speaker, the actual statutory instrument referred to in this statement. I don't see it lying on the table, it's not in the vote office, and it's not online. So we're not actually able to scrutinise the names of the countries. So perhaps from the dispatch box, she could list the countries which are to be added or removed to the list. Perhaps she could clarify whether the United States and its member states is one of those, and whether or not she has received any diplomatic representations, indeed from the United States or any of the others whose status is due to be changed, opposing the decision which she's announced today.
Well done. Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I apologise to the honourable gentleman. As far as I was aware, I was told that the statutory instrument has been laid. So this is news to me. It should be that should have been the case. But all of the details that he has asked for will be provided in the SI. I'm not going to read out a long list of countries at the dispatch box, but I will say that I personally have not received anything from the United States. I haven't received any particular message from them, so I don't think that that is an issue.
Sir Simon Clarke.
Deputy Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for a clear and cogent explanation of why the government's taken the action that it has. Does she agree with me that as we seek to address this very sensitive, important issue, it is very important that we avoid the kind of language which we heard from the honourable gentleman for the Rhondda, precisely because it obscures the fact that we are trying to work in the interest of vulnerable young people in finding a legislative way forward which protects their interest, rather than sees them signposted, often prematurely, in a direction which is irreversibly harmful to them.
Secretary of State.
I completely agree with my right honourable friend. He said it far better than I could. Let's have the debate in this House, rather than having people out there have the debate, which creates the climate of fear that many people are referring to. But the harder they make it for people to speak honestly in this chamber, the worse the situation will get. So I would urge members across the House to please listen to my right honourable friend for Middlesbrough. The point he makes is really important. We in this House need to set an example, shouting them barracking and calling people bigot and transphobic is not what is going to help LGBT people in this country.
Dame Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wonder if the Secretary of State would talk about the implications if sex was defined in law as biological for those existing trans people. Would they then have to, in all public appearances, act as if their biological sex was the thing that they had to do? So therefore you would have trans men having to use female toilets and trans women having to use male toilets unless they had a gender recognition certificate. I'm genuinely trying to find out what the implication of what she's announced, without any papers before us to look at and ask, are.
The Honourable Lady asks a very good question. And the way I would explain it is that this is not an issue that we had before. I wish we didn't have to make these changes. But the fact is, many trans people were living their lives peacefully and with dignity until others started exploiting the loopholes. It is not trans people that we are trying to limit. It is the predators who are using the loopholes and giving the trans community a bad name. So what we are trying to protect is the example I used before, male prisoners going into female prisons while claiming that they are the female. We need to continue to provide clarity because many public authorities are confused. They don't understand. People should use the toilets for their biological sex in the vast majority of cases. In some cases, that will be very difficult. But we need to provide more clarity so that predators do not exploit the loophole. That is what we're trying to do. As I said, in the vast majority of cases. But what we're trying to do is to protect vulnerable people.
Tom Hunt.
Speaker, it's the first time I've commented on this issue. Recently, this concept called the gender-bred person was found on a school intranet in Ipswich, and it promoted the idea that biology doesn't matter, it's always about what's in your head. It was complete self-identification. It also promoted outdated gender stereotypes. It had a list of hobbies and jobs associated with men and women. So presumably, if you like football, somebody might talk to you and say, well, actually, have you thought about actually being a boy, which is completely regressive. Does the Minister agree with me that there is no place for a gender-bred person in schools at all? And does she also agree with me that in primary schools we should be incredibly careful about promoting anything to do with gender ideology?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend raises a very good point, and it is one of the things that I am seeking to resolve. Because we have not provided clarity in the law, a lot of the space has been filled by many dubious organisations producing very, very dubious materials with no basis in biology, in the law whatsoever, but they're pushing it because they think that they get away with it. I think we as a government have a responsibility to clear out this material from schools. I think the Secretary of State for Education is looking at the materials that are being taught under RSHE, but it is very important, I think the point he makes is very clear, that primary school children in particular need to be protected. That is why the guidance we're going to be putting out on gender questioning children is going to address this issue, except in the most extreme safeguarding cases, and I expect that to include clinical advice. You should not be socially transitioning any primary school children at all, or introducing them to this theory.
Leonici.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for coming here and making this statement, because my constituent sphere has been that there's been such aggressive activism with regard to this that actually it puts not only gay and lesbian people in real danger of hate crimes and different activism going on, but also to protect men, boys, women and girls, because my biggest fear in all of this is that actually we have self-identifying men in particular who will actually cause confusion for women who still do not have equality, especially with regard to health treatment and making sure that they are safe in single-sex spaces.
I think my honourable friend is quite right. We need to make sure that we are providing accurate data and hospitals in particular, but loads of public authorities across the board know exactly who it is and what they are dealing with. We've seen examples, for instance, of people not receiving the right medical care because they were wrongly identified as the wrong sex because of possession of GRC or a self-declared difference in sex or gender. We need to make sure that that is not happening. We've seen issues across the board. The ONS is again looking at the census which it carried out to see what it can do to make things clearer, because it was quite obvious that many people who completed the census did not understand the question. And that is what we're trying to say, that this is a new space, a new area. Lots of things are developing. We should not be rushing to legislate. We should be legislating very carefully. That is why many of the things people have been expecting are taking time. We're waiting for the CAS review, but we will carry out this work.
Jonathan Lord.
A few years ago, a loving, caring, intelligent, thoughtful married couple came to me in my surgery, very distressed, because they just found out that their child had been questioning their gender at school, and the school for several months had not informed them. This child had been counselled by two adults who had no appropriate qualifications at all. As we seek clarity on the law and the guidelines here, can my right honourable friend reassure me that parents will be included, informed and included in those conversations, except in the most extraordinary circumstances?
I can confirm that. That is exactly one of the things that I wanted to make sure we saw in the guidance for gender questioning children. It is absurd for such a significant change to be taking place without parents knowing what is going on. Yes, of course, in the most extreme circumstances, that may not be possible, but the vast majority of parents love their children and care for them. We should not treat parents as the enemy here. They need to know what is going on, because quite a lot of the time, gender questioning children have comorbidities. Perhaps they are autistic, perhaps there is something else that is going on in the mental health space that needs clinical advice rather than just put on the pathway for social transition.
Brendan Clark-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for giving us this reassurance that this government remains committed to protecting women's rights, protecting children with policies that are based on biological reality and not extreme ideology conflating sex and gender. And does she agree that today's statement will help stop people finding loopholes around this?
Secretary of State.
Yes, I do agree. The purpose of this SI is to provide clarity. The law has not really been updated since 2011. We need to be more frequent in terms of making sure that we're keeping up with what is going on in this space. The SI, just in answer to earlier questions, the SI was laid at 12 p.m. I'm sorry that it is not ready, for members, but that is exactly what the legislation is intended to, and I do agree with my honourable friend.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As someone who spent their entire professional career working in state secondary schools as a teacher, the one place where debates around gender self-identification should never apply is with children. And just like the divisive critical race theory that we've seen enter our school, we're now seeing the equally divisive gender ideology too. So can the Secretary of State outline for my residents in Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Talk that her announcement today will help to seek to clarify and make sure the classroom is a safe space for vulnerable young people?
I really welcome the intervention by my honourable friend. As a teacher, he knows how carefully we need to look after children and make sure that we are safeguarding across the board. That is quite right. This legislation, this SI, is just one step that we are taking in order to provide clarity. There will be more. There will be more coming. Not all of it will be legislative, but there will be measures brought to. There will be measures which will be bringing into place that will help people understand exactly what is going on. We should not assume that the knowledge that we have in this House is present in the population. I have met people who don't understand the difference between being gay or being trans. The Honourable Lady is complaining that my answers are long. It's because I want people to hear the truth and to understand what it is that we as a government are doing.
James Daly.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It seems that the main feature of countries that have come off this list is in their adoption of laws which remove all safeguards that exist around changing gender. Does my right honourable friend agree that this approach is dangerous, and what further steps is she taking to address its expansion?
I thank my honourable friend. I cannot control what it is that other countries do. All we can do is emphasize what our own policies are. We do have conversations with international counterparts across the House. There has been actually a lot of interest in what we are doing. I remember speaking, I won't name the country, a minister for another country who said that they had brought in self-ID early in theirs because they thought we were going to do it, and they were thinking again. There are actually countries internationally, even in Europe, who are taking steps to limit this because they're seeing the consequences and they don't think that the benefits outweigh the disbenefits. And I'm glad that we in the UK are setting a standard for evidence-based policy making and showing others how to get this right.
Point of order. Relating to the statement.
I will take the point of order relating to the statement because I think the Secretary of State might be able to clarify it. Point of order, Stephen Down.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And further to the point I raised in my question to the Secretary of State about the information that hadn't been provided to the House, I do have a list here which appears to be a list of countries and territories which are changing status as a result of the statement and the order that's being laid, but it doesn't appear to have been published or available in the Vote Office. And it includes a large number of Australian states, Canadian provinces, United States including Colorado, New Mexico, New York City, New York State, and other places, and actually a number of European countries, Malta, Mexico in Latin America, Luxembourg, many other locations. I just wondered if the Secretary of State could confirm for the House's interest whether that list is correct or not.
First of all, could I just say, I believe that the Secretary of State did confirm that the order has been laid and it should therefore be available in the Vote Office, but the Secretary of State might like to confirm that, or to say that she might, if she does not have the information immediately available, that I'll be able to report it back. Secretary of State.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to confirm that it has been laid. I've just heard from officials that it has been laid.
And we will ensure that it is available in the Vote Office.
It was laid well before the statement to the House. I'm sorry it hasn't been published, but it was laid, so we have done our bit.
I think the Secretary of State has confirmed that it was laid. We will find out why it wasn't in the Vote Office and come back to the honour. Point of order. Shadow Leader of the House, Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wonder if you have been given notice of any oral statement by the Home Secretary today, given he yesterday signed a treaty with Rwanda. As you are aware, Madam Deputy Speaker, the government has repeatedly made major announcements outside this House and has not been forthcoming in bringing these opportunities to members to scrutinise them here. I note that the Home Secretary was in fact in his place today for Prime Minister's questions, so would have been able to give an oral statement. And can you also confirm that statements can be made at any time during the day, and have you been given notice that one will be made later today?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her point of order and for giving notice of it. As she knows, the Speaker has been very clear on the importance of ministers making statements first to this House. I can confirm that it is possible for a statement to be made at an unusual time, i.e. not straight after questions as would be the norm. The government would need to notify the Speaker of their wish to do so, and if that does happen later today, I'm sure that the whole House will be notified in good time. Thank you. Point of order, Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And on a point of order, I'd like to seek your advice, because on the 6th of December 1923, the first 3 female Labour members of Parliament were elected. Margaret Bonfield, Dorothy Jewson and Susan Lawrence. And these 3 women, Madam Deputy Speaker, campaigned tirelessly for election against all odds. And between 1929 and 1931, Margaret Bonfield became the UK's first woman cabinet minister after being named the Minister of Labour. That is a profoundly important anniversary in our country's history, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I seek your advice about how it can be marked on the record of this House?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her point of order and for giving me notice of it. All I can say is that I think the Honourable Lady has answered her own point of order in drawing our attention to this anniversary in the way that she has done. Order. Before I call the Right Honourable Member for Fareham to make her personal statement, I remind the House that such statements are heard in silence and without interruption. And if anybody feels that they can't abide by that, they are welcome to leave now. So I repeat that, in silence and without interruption. Personal statement, Suella Braverman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to make this statement, and I'd like to put on record my wishes to Mr. Speaker and that he makes a speedy recovery. Madam Deputy Speaker, serving in Cabinet for just under 4 years has been a true honour, and I'm thankful for the opportunity and grateful to the many civil servants and ministers with whom I worked. We achieved a great deal in the last 12 months. Landmark legislation in the Public Order Act and the National Security Act. 20,000 new police officers, more than England and Wales have ever seen before. One of the largest ever pay rises for the police. Greater powers to dismiss rogue officers, and a review of the legal protections to empower our brave firearms officers. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to talk about the crisis on which I spent more time working than any other. Mass, uncontrolled, illegal immigration. We are all here familiar with the problem. Tens of thousands of mostly young men, many with values and social mores at odds with our own, pouring into our country day after day, month after month, year after year. Many come from safe countries. Many are not refugees, but are economic migrants. All have paid thousands of pounds to criminal gangs to break into Britain. All have come from a safe country, France, who, let's face it, should be doing so much more to stop them. This is putting unsustainable pressure on our public finances and our public services. It's straining community cohesion, jeopardising national security, and harming public safety. The British people all understand this, Madam Deputy Speaker. The question is, does the government? And will it now finally act to stop it? The Prime Minister, rightly, committed to doing whatever it takes to stop the boats. And he should be commended for dedicating more time and toil than any of his predecessors to this endeavour. And unlike the Leader of the Opposition, who would rather bury his head in the sand, he has actually advanced a plan. We made some progress during my tenure as Home Secretary. The overall crossings have fallen by 30%. The number of illegal Albanian arrivals down by 90%. And we were starting to close down asylum hotels. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, crossings are down is not the same as stopping the boats. And as Home Secretary, I consistently advocated for legislative measures that would have secured the delivery of our Rwanda partnership as soon as the bill became law. Last summer, following defeat in the Court of Appeal, I advised that we should scrap rather than continue passage of the Illegal Migration Act bill in favour of a more robust alternative that excluded international and human rights laws. When that was rejected, I urged that we needed to work up a credible Plan B in the event of a Supreme Court loss. Following defeat in the Supreme Court, the Prime Minister has finally agreed to introduce emergency legislation, and I welcome his decision. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is now 3 weeks on from that judgment, and we are yet to see a bill. I'm told its publication is imminent, but we are running out of time. This is an emergency, and we need to see the bill now. Madam Deputy Speaker, My deeper concern, however, relates to the substance of what may be in that bill. Previous attempts have failed because they did not address the root cause of the problem. Expansive human rights laws, flowing from the European Convention on Human Rights, replicated in Labour's Human Rights Act, are being interpreted elastically by courts, domestic and foreign, to literally prevent our Rwanda plan from getting off the ground. And this problem relates to so much more than just illegal arrivals. From my time as Home Secretary, I can say that the same human rights framework is producing insanities that the public would scarcely believe. Foreign terrorists we can't deport because of their human rights. Terrorists we have to let back in because of their human rights. Foreign rapists and paedophiles who should have been removed but are released back into the community only to reoffend. Yep, because of their human rights. Violent criminals pulled off deportation flights at the last minute thanks to the help of Labour MPs, free to wander the streets and commit further horrific crimes, including murder. Protesters let off the hook for tearing down statues and gluing themselves to roads. And our brave military veterans harassed through the courts some 40 years after their service. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is no secret that I support leaving the European Convention on Human Rights and replacing the Human Rights Act with a British Bill of Rights that protects the vulnerable and our national security and finishes the job of Brexit by extricating us from the foreign court and restores real parliamentary supremacy. But I accept that the government won't do that and that it is a debate for another day. And crucially, when it comes to stopping the boats now, leaving the ECHR is not the only way to cut the Gordian knot. Emergency legislation would enable this only if it meets the following tests. Firstly, the bill must address the Supreme Court's concerns about the safety of Rwanda. Secondly, the bill must enable flights before the next election by blocking off all routes of challenge. The powers to detain and remove must be exercisable, notwithstanding the Human Rights Act, the European Convention on Human Rights, the Refugee Convention, and all other international law. Thirdly, the bill must remedy deficiencies in the Illegal Migration Act to ensure that removals can take place within days, rather than allowing individual claims and challenges which drag on for months. Fourth, the bill must enable the administrative detention of illegal arrivals until they are removed. And just as we rapidly built Nightingale hospitals to deal with COVID, so we must build Nightingale-style detention facilities to deliver the necessary capacity. Greece and Turkey have done so. Greece and Turkey have done so. And the only way to do this, as I advocated for in government, is with the support of the Ministry of Defence. Fifth, Parliament must be prepared to sit over Christmas to get this bill done. All of this, Madam Deputy Speaker, comes down to a simple question. Who governs Britain? Where does ultimate authority for the UK lie? Is it with the British people and their elected representatives? Or is it in the vague, shifting and unaccountable concept of international law? On Monday, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister announced measures that start to better reflect public frustration on legal migration. He can now follow that up with a bill that reflects public fury on illegal migration and actually stop the boats. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is now or never. The Conservative Party faces electoral oblivion in a matter of months if we introduce... The Conservative Party faces electoral oblivion in a matter of months if we introduce yet another bill destined to fail? Do we fight for sovereignty, or do we let our party die? Now, I may not have always found the right words in the past, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I refuse to sit by and allow us to fail. The trust that millions of people placed in us cannot be discarded as an inconvenient detail. If we summon the political courage to do what is truly necessary, difficult though it may be, to fight for the British people, we will regain their trust. And if the Prime Minister leads that fight, he has my total support. Thank you.
Thank the Right Honourable Lady for her personal statement, and we now move on to the presentation of bills. I will allow those who wish to leave to do so. As quickly and quietly as possible. Thank you. Thank you. Presentation of Bill, Julie Elliott.
Building Societies Act 1986 Amendment Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, 19th of January 2024.
Friday, the 19th of January 2024. Presentation of Bill, Chris Elmore.
Shared Parental Leave and Pay Bereavement Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, the 26th of January 2024.
Friday, the 26th of January 2024. Mr. Lawrence Robertson.
Pensions, Special Rules for End-of-Life